awaiting second motion and a quorum being present, we may proceed. Member for Beaufort North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the motion which was presented by the Member of Parliament for Castries East and the Prime Minister for a loan which would allow the Millennium Heights Medical Complex to pay outstanding debts, one of which is to the tune of over $11 million, $11.4 million. And the other aspect of this loan guarantee is for the Millennium Heights Medical Complex to regularize some of their payments for an overdraft facility of $6.5 million and also a facility to meet urgent capital works of $5.0 million and a guarantee which will allow the use of credit card facilities. Mr. Speaker, the business of the NHL contract, which the Prime Minister spoke to, this contract deals with the consultancy between the government of St. Lucia through the Ministry of Health and NHL. NHL was contracted, Mr. Speaker, to provide advisory services and consultancy services to the Owen King European Union Hospital, as well as to assist with the implementation of a number of programs. The contract, Mr. Speaker, was for the consultants to provide consultancy services and training and so on in the following areas: biomedical engineering training, medical operations training, non-medical operations training, quality training, hospital infection control, improvement plans, mechanical, electrical and plumbing training, human resources training, supply chain management training. Mr. Speaker, this contract was signed on October 7, 2020 for a period of 2 years. The first official meeting between the consultant NHL and MHMC, the Millennium Heights Medical Complex, took place on December 3rd, 2020 via Zoom. So the contract was signed in October 2020, October 7, 2020, and the first official meeting was on December 3rd, 2020 via Zoom. Mr. Speaker, let me just lay out a number of other very pertinent foundation principles, so to speak, or information which will allow me to lay my argument before the Parliament. The arrival of NHL personnel, Mr. Speaker, occurred 8 to 10 months after the signing of the contract. The consulting team in May 2021, July 2021, Some of the consultants, especially the clinical consultants, were not on the ground throughout the life of the contract, and it is very vague in the contract, Mr. Speaker. There is very vague information which would either tie those clinical consultants to the actual project area, which is the OK EU hospital, or which allow them to operate from outside. It's also very clear, Mr. Speaker, that this consultancy took place during the COVID-19 pandemic, in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore some of what I'm about to say will be taken in that context. Mr. Speaker, the question which is very vivid in my mind, and it has been vivid in my mind from the day we came into office, from the day we were given the opportunity to manage the affairs of this country. When I went to the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Elderly Affairs and learned of this contract, the question was whether the services that were in the contract, which had to be provided by the consultants, whether these services, first of all, could not be found here in St. Lucia, as the member for VA4 South intimated, and secondly, whether we needed to spend $25 million over 2 years to get these services. Mr. Speaker, it is a question, even after this debate, which must continue to be asked, because it again demonstrates the way in which the last government operated business in St. Lucia. And this is not only in relation to this contract. The member for VA4 South and others in other debates have described, some of my colleagues have tabulated the amounts, and the amounts are in millions and millions and millions. Whether it be the Lockerbie contract, whether it be DSH, whether it be Pomandu, all over the place, all over the government services, you find arrangements, contracts by the last government which certainly puts the people of St. Lucia in jeopardy and puts the interests of this country in jeopardy. I know that the Minister for Finance and the member for Castries East will certainly, I'm sure, make some statements in that regard. But I want to assure members that we will do whatever we have to do to report to the people of St. Lucia and to ensure that all of those arrangements, the terms of all of these arrangements, are brought to light. But I believe the Prime Minister will certainly deal with this matter, whether it be in this debate or in debates to come. Mr. Speaker, I spent a few hours with the principals of this company, the NHL Group. And in all of our deliberations, not for one moment did I doubt whether they were competent to do what they said they were doing. That was never my concern. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is very clear that this group has arrangements in other countries, and it's very clear that certain procedures are being performed in other countries. There are people who speak to services which they have access through this group. So it is not for me to opine on whether they have the expertise or the contacts to deliver services. But clearly, Mr. Speaker, as the member for VA4 South said, and the Prime Minister has said many times before, and this is, in the presentation of this motion, the Prime Minister said it again. Somehow, the last government did not believe in our people. We had a transition team with transition plans, and somehow the last government felt that they were not competent enough to transition the hospital, that they were not competent enough to go through the procedures and processes which would cause us to have some of these same results. or even better results, or different results to achieve the same aim. That somehow we could not get a group of St. Lucians and spend far less than $25 million. It is a continuation of the way in which the last government operated. And Mr. Speaker, even though we have contractual arrangements, there are certain truths which must be laid bare before the people of St. Lucia, and the Prime Minister has said before, and I believe in him, that the people who must account will account. But Mr. Speaker, I want to spend some time to explain to you, Mr. Speaker, to this House and the people of St. Lucia, to explain how we went about this, how we went about assessing this group, assessing their arrangements in St. Lucia, and how we went about deciding whether there is value for money, whether the services that were provided, whether these services are being used at the hospital, whether these services are possibly overrated, are they important, and whether the hospital actually benefited from these services. From the get-go, I want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that the board of directors, headed by Mrs. Joanna Reynolds, and even before Mrs. Joanna Reynolds, headed by Mr. Costello Mitchell, spent many hours debating, turning the sheets over and over again, and looking at this contract, having headaches upon headaches about this contract. My position was always this, Mr. Speaker. We came into government, and I said to you before that this contract was signed on October 7th, 2020. October 7th, 2020. We came into government, and we found this contract and many other contracts, and my position was that the board of directors of the Millennium Heights Medical Complex had to review the deliverables, prepare a report, have the technical teams go through the deliverables and present a report to me and to the Prime Minister and eventually to the Cabinet of Ministers, so that we could determine what really happened in this contract. Mr. Speaker, the board of directors spent many meetings on this, and I want to thank them for their dedication. I know many times, Mr. Speaker, there were very nervous moments, and many of us, I dare say, many of us from the get-go believed that almost immediately we should do something about these contracts. Almost immediately, there were many individuals, myself included, who felt that this is so egregious that we should immediately do something about it. But then again, we always get counsel from our Prime Minister that whatever you do, ensure that you do it properly. Ensure that you go through the process. If you have a board, speak with your board. You don't just take decisions because of what you feel at the moment. Ensure that you have the evidence. And so the board of directors, Mr. Speaker, was asked to certainly go through this contract and look at the deliverables. It was signed in 2020, October 7th, and to find out whether indeed the NHL group delivered on the contract. Generally, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say so from the onset, generally the board of directors felt that based on what is in the contract, that the NHL group generally performed. But there are several concerns and several issues. Mr. Speaker, the board of directors put together a review committee to look at the deliverables, and this review committee, Mr. Speaker, was a committee of the board, and it included 4 board members, and 2 of these board members are physicians, medical doctors, the CEO, and another director. Mr. Speaker, the findings of this committee are very interesting. Well, a while ago I said to you that generally the committee felt that NHL performed, but again, there can be a lot of interpretations. And as a member for VA4 South indicated, if you have activities in the contract such as biomedical engineering training, medical operations training, non-medical operations training, quality training, hospital infection control, improvement plans, mechanical, electrical and plumbing training, human resources training, supply chain management training. If you have those, I rather suspect that you will perform some of it. But Mr. Speaker, the team recognized also the role played by the COVID-19 pandemic on the delayed arrival of the consultants between 2020 and 2021. Based on what the team came up with, it was recommended that an even more comprehensive exercise be conducted at the departmental level to ensure that we validate or invalidate the outputs as presented by NHL. Mr. Speaker, it would seem that, first of all, submissions that include standard operating procedures, operating protocols, handbooks, and forms and so on, these, some of which were submitted, but clearly there needs to be even more work to ensure that these are used and operated to benefit the hospital. Mr. Speaker, there was a whole question of responsibility at the level of team leaders at the Millennium Heights Medical Complex and how they interfaced with the NHL team, the NHL group, and what that did in terms of the deliverables. I think it's important for the Parliament to know that there are many drafts of the outputs that are still, there are many drafts of the outputs available because the contractors are saying, the consultants are saying, Mr. Speaker, that team leaders at the Millennium Heights Medical Complex had to, involve themselves even more significantly in the work. Mr. Speaker, it is very important to note that there are some critical areas of the Millennium Heights Medical Complex operations like quality, biomedical engineering, electrical and plumbing, and non-clinical operations that are still deficient. Some other notable findings, Mr. Speaker, of the committee. The committee notes that there was no apparent project management governance structure for the consultancy. Interim reports were generally signed off by Millennium Heights Management Committee management, evidencing that work had been completed without validation of outputs. So, Mr. Speaker, this speaks to...
Speaker.
Member Sozel?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the member will yield, but I would like to raise a point of elucidation.
Are you yielding for a point of elucidation?
Yes.
Proceed, Member for Sozel.
Thank you. Whether the member or maybe the Prime Minister in his summary, based on quite a bit of what he has said, I want to ask the question, what is the reason why, or have they considered contesting the contract? That's because it seemed to be quite a few deficiencies or loopholes based on the contract. So I don't know if there's a particular reason why we don't find it appropriate to contest.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a point of he needs some clarification on why the contract was not contested. Mr. Speaker, we came into government having found a contract signed and works ongoing. It is very interesting that the member for Choiseul would ask why didn't this government contest the contract, which his government left, and so many other contracts. But Mr. Speaker, in time, those contracts the Minister for Finance will certainly give you the roadmap on how we're going to deal with these matters. It is not only this contract and the way the last government operated which needs to be contested, Mr. Speaker. You heard the member for V4 South and what he said. You heard the Prime Minister with all of the headaches that he's had with contracts and deals left behind by the last government. It seems as if this government again is just here to mop up, Mr. Speaker. But why didn't we contest whether we should have contested the contract? We found a signed contract, people on the ground working, Mr. Speaker. We felt that the deliverables, that is what we needed to contest, to ensure that what his government signed, that the people delivered on it. Our board of directors formed a committee to go over the deliverables. Generally, they are indicating that there was performance, but there are several issues that have to be dealt with, Mr. Speaker. So again, it is just another of the several messes which was left by the last government. If I may continue, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for the Parliament to note that a number of the outputs were in draft form, awaiting feedback, but the NHL consultants, all in many of the cases, Mr. Speaker, indicated that COVID-19 was a factor in many of these situations. Mr. Speaker, the NHL organization, the committee fell short of expectations in supporting operational areas such as biomedical engineering, the non-medical services, and quality, which all had very low scores, very low deliverables, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, this government has decided to pay the outstanding sum, and all of us, Mr. Speaker, cringe at the fact that this contract is about $1 million a month, almost similar to another contract at the St. Jude Hospital, almost similar to what's happening at the Dare Mall. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very clear that the last government seemed to be this last government was very fond of $1 million a month. But, Mr. Speaker, the question is whether the atmosphere of a hospital in transition really benefited from this investment of $25 million. Whether the last government, in their haste, the COVID-19 forced the last government to move the hospital to the Owen King, to move Victoria Hospital to the Owen King EU Hospital. Whether the hospital was ready, whether the atmosphere of a transition allowed that kind of activity. Was the service available to us? And why did the government at the time go ahead with it? These are the questions that must be answered, Mr. Speaker. Why was the focus not on the completion of the transitioning? They fired the transitioning team, and to date, Mr. Speaker, even as we speak, the hospital is still grappling with the transition process. The transition process is not complete. We are still grappling with issues of staff in relation to the terms, in relation to the employment terms. We just went to Cabinet recently to ensure that the benefits of employees would transfer if they go to the Owen King EU Hospital. We continue to hold meetings with staff members who did not transition to the Owen King Hospital. Some were left at Victoria Hospital, some of them almost in limbo. All of these issues, Mr. Speaker, while the last government was signing a multi-million-dollar contract with NHL, a consultancy firm. The structural issues in the operations of the hospital, the problems with accident and emergency, the pharmacy issues, all the human resource issues, Mr. Speaker. But the last government felt it was best for them to go into a consultancy of $25 million. The French, always willing to assist us. They were there, willing and ready to go, but the last government felt that it was not good enough to get assistance from the French. Mr. Speaker, it is really sad that this country had to go through all of what they went through. And the last Minister for Finance continues to stand here to say that he was the best manager, the best financial manager, the best Minister for Finance. But Mr. Speaker, we will, having paid all of this money, Mr. Speaker, the Board of Directors of the Millennium Heights Medical Complex intends to pursue the deliverables and to ensure that the hospital benefits from what we've paid for, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the rest of the other aspects of this motion speak to a loan facility to meet urgent capital works from the Millennium Heights Medical Complex. A $5 million capital works request for the Owen King EU Hospital. As we know, Mr. Speaker, the Owen King EU Hospital was funded at a cost of 48 million euros. 36 million of which was allocated for the physical construction, another 8 million for the provision of biomedical equipment and furniture. Mr. Speaker, it was completed in 2015, has 2 floors spread across 4 wings and include operating theaters, intensive care units, the morgue, the lab, wards for inpatient treatment, an intensive care, ambulance bay, outpatient clinics, physiotherapy services, and so on. In an effort to upgrade the existing facility, new equipment is required, and the board is seeking a loan of $5 million to finance it. The Prime Minister earlier spoke about the installation of the chilled water system, $1 million. And Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke about the mold situation that I will not repeat. But I think it is important to repeat that the hospital has spent $15,000 a month for the past 3 years. $15,000 a month for the past 3 years for remediation in relation to mold, air quality, and so on. Calculate it. $15,000 a month for the past 3 years. Another item is the rehabilitation of wards. The Prime Minister spoke about the mental wellness center. And if you go to the mental wellness center, if you visit there, Mr. Speaker, you will really feel for the nurses and the doctors and the patients who have mental issues. Some of the faucets, some very basic things, Mr. Speaker. Faucets, toilets, very basic things, Mr. Speaker, were not looked after properly. And we must replace some of them and to give our people a better environment within which they can be treated. I will not speak to the upgrade of the sewer treatment plant. Prime Minister spoke to it, $864,000. And look at how long it's been there. Since 2017. How can, Mr. Speaker, we say we care about people? And since 2017, your sewage system at a major hospital is malfunctioning, Mr. Speaker. Sewage. And you say you care about the country? We must, Mr. Speaker, do something about it. And we will do something about it, Mr. Speaker, with this $5 million loan. It's very important for us to keep focus on the basic things, what Dr. Dexter James, the CEO of the Millennium Heights Medical Complex, calls mission critical things. You cannot achieve your mission if your sewage system is not working. And no government can say you are worth your salt if a hospital sewage system is not working properly for so long, and we will do something about it. The backup generator, very important, $734,000. And if I have to explain to you what is happening at the hospital with the current generator, we need that backup generator so that the whole hospital can be served properly. And the building maintenance system is critical. It controls the pumps and the water system for the dialysis patients, for the dialysis plants, the fire system, fire monitoring and so on, smoke monitoring. All of these systems are important, mission critical. Mr. Speaker, it's also very important for us to realize that the Owen King EU Hospital is our primary or premier secondary medical facility. And if these mission critical areas are not addressed, then we are going to have serious, very serious problems. Also, Mr. Speaker, the hospital is seeking a loan of $6.5 million on overdraft facility. The overdraft facility, which is part of the loan which this motion speaks to, is very important because the board, as we know, Mr. Speaker, operates under the Millennium Heights Medical Complex Act of 2015. The board has a mandate to ensure that the facilities under the management of this board are resourced properly. And I want you to listen to this. Over the past years, Mr. Speaker, the operations have been severely affected by the board's inability to meet its recurrent expenditure on a timely basis. Of the recurrent budget of $52.2 million, Mr. Speaker, in the current financial year, only 48 million of it is for salaries. And every month, listen to this, every month, the hospital provides services of up to $5 million every month. So individuals who come in for, whether it be surgery or you name it, accident and emergency, every month the hospital provides services of up to $5 million EC dollars. You know how much they collect every month, Mr. Speaker? Some time ago I made a mistake. I said it was every year. But every month, on average, the hospital, the Owen King EU Hospital, collects $400,000. So they provide services of $5 million a month, but they collect $400,000. And when we look at the figures, Mr. Speaker, and we analyze it, there are opportunities also, because a lot of these patients who come to the hospital, you know, the NIC people, some of them from Equity and Social Services, the calculation indicates, Mr. Speaker, we did some rough calculations, and the CEO says to me, if we can collect at least 60% of that $5 million, if the National Insurance Corporation remits to the hospital the monies that the members go out to the OKEU to get services for, if they remit that, and Equity and the other institutions remit to the hospitals, at least 60% of that, we can almost say we have UHC at the hospital. He says we may not even need money from central government. So we just have to now focus on the primary health sector. So we have to look at all of this, to look at how we can do healthcare financing, how we can work it out so that our people can get the best care possible. And it's possible, Mr. Speaker. So this overdraft facility is important to assist, because out of the $52.2 million from the recurrent budget, 48 million goes to salaries, and you can well imagine there's not much left. Mr. Speaker, the overdraft facility is also very important for goods and services, because the hospital needs to ensure that they pay for goods and services in a timely way. Vendors are knocking at the door all of the time. It is very important to keep the vendors happy, purchase drugs, and so on. Also, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important to note that as of April this year, the board will be required to implement payroll systems to process salaries and employee benefits for all employees. This would mean, Mr. Speaker, that we need a standby facility to be in place to ensure that there are no shortfalls, so that there are no delays in the payments of salaries and benefits to the workers. I'm telling you all of this, Mr. Speaker, to tell you that when the last government speaks about they did the best in this and the best in that, and they speak about all of their achievements and the multi-million-dollar DSH and all of the things they did, and the member for Miku South comes to the house the last time and says he doesn't understand what is universal health care. He doesn't know what that is. He speaks about healthcare financing. Healthcare financing. I want to explain to you, Mr. Speaker, the deficiencies. What were they doing for 5 years when we have all of these deficiencies at the Owen King EU Hospital? And the CEO says to me, Minister, these are mission critical things. And in order for us to stop this thing of people at accident and emergency complaining, and rightly so, that they're spending so long in accident and emergency, there are other mission critical things that are necessary. And the hospital needs this money to ensure that they implement the programs. But I want to take some time, Mr. Speaker, to give you some context for all of this, because the board of directors has been working very hard, and I want to congratulate them. The board of directors, members who come from various disciplines. We have physicians, people in, from the union and so on, and they have really done great human service to keep the Millennium Heights Medical Complex and the Owen King EU Hospital going in the middle of all of these challenges. It's really rough, and the board has kept it going. And I want to thank the board. I want to thank the past CEO, Mrs. Alexander, and the current CEO, Dr. Dexter James, who's doing a wonderful job, I must say. So I must tell you very quickly, Mr. Speaker, that in 2022, the Millennium Heights Medical Complex had a lot of work to do, and they did achieve much. You can well imagine over 6,000 patient services, Mr. Speaker. Over 15,000 people accessing accident and emergency. Okay? Over 15,000 persons seen. Over 1,500 surgeries. Over 1,168 deliveries. And 94 individuals on dialysis. And we have so many more individuals knocking on the door. But it's very interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the hospital has a system to monitor patients, how patients see the hospital, the level of satisfaction at the hospital. And there is a system called the Net Promoter Score, NPS. The feedback from patients is generally above average, 3.8 out of 5. And an NPS score of 73%. In December, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to note that 845 individuals who accessed services at the Owen King EU Hospital were interviewed. And 73% of them indicated that they were pleased with the services, and that they would recommend the services of the Owen King EU Hospital to their family and friends. And I want to congratulate the doctors. I want to congratulate the doctors, the nurses, the staff of the Owen King EU Hospital, the Millennium Heights, the Wellness Center, and Turning Point for their hard work. I know it's difficult, Mr. Speaker, and we have a lot of challenges. People spend too much time at the accident and emergency. There are times we don't have enough pharmacy services. And all of these are challenges. But the staff at the Owen King EU Hospital, Mr. Speaker, have not given up. And the respondents to the surveys are saying that increasingly they're not 100% happy, but they will recommend to their friends and their family. I want to also say to you, Mr. Speaker, that in 2022, in November of last year, the board was able to successfully enroll the Owen King EU Hospital in an international accreditation program with Accreditation Canada, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to working with patients, healthcare organizations, policymakers, and the public to improve healthcare. So, the Owen King EU Hospital has been approved for accreditation with Accreditation Canada. Very important. Mr. Speaker, a readiness assessment is due to be conducted during the week of June 12, 2023. The board has also decided that they are going to embrace the people-centered mode of care, putting people first, and they are working very hard at that. They have established board committees, and very importantly, Mr. Speaker, I want to say something here. Over the years, whether it be hospitals and other statutory boards, many of them, some of them have done better than others, but many of them come to the Minister for Finance for financing. The hospitals need this, the hospitals need that. But here is what the Owen King EU Hospital, the Millennium Heights Medical Complex Board has decided. They have embarked on a new approach for fundraising, and this approach, Mr. Speaker, speaks to hospital philanthropy. And that is how a lot of the large hospitals all over the world, that's where they're going. So they're not depending only on government. And they have started their efforts. Through this effort, Mr. Speaker, the Millennium Heights Medical Complex has attracted $129,851 to construct the oxygen housing plant at the Owen King EU Hospital, Mr. Speaker. The board is currently financing what will be called the Millennium Heights Medical Complex Trust Incorporated. So there's going to be a trust, and through this special purpose vehicle, the board will seek to raise funds all over the world from credible sources in order to finance the operations of the hospital. The board is committed, Mr. Speaker, to raising $1 million in the first year of the operations of that trust. And I just told you that they have already raised, while they're working on finalizing the trust, they have already raised US $129.85 million. Sorry, $189,851, not million. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very important that the hospital strengthens its corporate office, and they are going to do so without increasing hospital fees. There is no plan to increase the hospital fees at the Millennium Heights Medical Complex. They are going to re-strategize, they're going to become even more efficient, and we will see the results. Mr. Speaker, the hospital has decided on a program called People First Program. I'm not sure where the name came from. It's a very interesting name. People First Program. So what does first mean? Fiscal management and performance to improve that, institutional strengthening and capacity building, revenue generation, service quality, and transfer and transition. So, Mr. Speaker, I really look forward to all of the developments at the Millennium Heights Medical Complex. So while, Mr. Speaker, it is painful to see what we've had to go through, painful, Mr. Speaker, to see what the last government left for us. And there's a lot more, Mr. Speaker, where healthcare is concerned. Today, I'm not going to go into all of it, but there's a lot more in relation to what the last government left for us to do in healthcare. The deals, the contracts. We spoke about the vaccines and so many others. But we are very diligently working with teams of individuals. It is not just the ministry, teams of individuals. And we are working hard to build teams all around the island. We have a great team at St. Jude, the board of directors and the management. What we are trying to do is to ensure that we get the supplies, the equipment for them, to motivate them, ensure there is proper security. The government is doing what it has to do to ensure that we encourage our team members to perform. There's a great team at the Millennium Heights Medical Complex. We have a new CEO, we have a board, a dedicated board, and they're working very hard for the people of St. Lucia. I can assure the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, that we are not going to be as reckless as the last government. We are not going to be as reckless with the taxpayers' money. And we will come to Parliament to report to you on the progress of the Millennium Heights Medical Complex, as we will with the St. Jude Hospital. Remember, we came here for support for the St. Jude Hospital. We've come before, and now we are here for support for the Millennium Heights Medical Complex. I wish to thank the Prime Minister and my cabinet colleagues for all of the support for health. All of the support for health so far, and I'm sure there's more support to come. We will not achieve everything right away, Mr. Speaker, but the mission critical things, like sewage, that the last government didn't see it fit to fix. And they come to this house to ask about what is universal health care. How would the member for Miku South know what is universal health care if he can't fix the sewage at the OKEU hospital? If you can't think that waste is important to fix, how will you know what is universal health care? And every time he comes here, he asks about, oh, what is this universal health care? He doesn't know what universal health care is. So that is the kind of thing we had that passed as government in the past. And Mr. Speaker, it is difficult. I support this motion, and it's difficult. But Mr. Speaker, we are going to work with the Millennium Heights Medical Complex to ensure that we achieve what we have to achieve. Avant moi, Mr. Speaker, je voulais dire que l'argent nous vient prêter aujourd'hui, il critique et qui a fait chez nous fait nous mal parce que le dernier gouvernement signé un agrément avec une compagnie qui est business l'autre pays, il a créé NHL et l'argent ça c'est 25 millions de dollars pour 2 années. C'est à quoi dit tous les mois à 2 années nous pour bailler compagnie ça là 1 million de dollars. Ça me dit, Mr. Speaker, moi parle avec ces mon compagnie, moi parle avec eux, moi te dit combien meeting avec eux, et qu'ils dit ces bagages yo kay faire à l'hôpital là, c'est un chay un trauma, un chay qu'on yo ka dit en anglais process, yo dit pour mettre à l'hôpital là pour qui c'était bagages marcher bien. Avec c'est European Union, c'est European Union, c'est Jean France là, t'es qu'à faire ça ben nous pour rien. Yo te dit nous yo ka fait ça ben nous pour rien. Mais dernier gouvernement jeté ça. Yo presque fait nous nianti chicane avec ces gens nous en France. Avec yo jeté ça. Avec yo prend compagnie avec bayo en comptoir pour 25 millions de dollars pour 2 l'année. Alors nous ka dit les nous en tout un gouvernement le 7 octobre 2020 dernier gouvernement signé contre ça là avec nous avons qui board Owen King l'hôpital là a dit yo performé oui yo fait bagaille yo performé mais là il y a chaque bagaille qui nous espérer pour nous joindre qui nous les a joindre primaire nous caille acheter pour nous jouer un bénéfice, c'est contre ça là, parce que c'est l'argent pays Saint-Lucie qui paye pour ça. Nous avons dit, c'est les autres, l'argent qui a aussi aidé Millennium Heights Medical Complex, ou bien Owen King l'hôpital là, pour faire chaque bagaille qui n'est pas fait. Là, il y a un système, côté c'est pour vite là, bagaille pas qu'à travailler bien. Et depuis 2016, c'est bagaille ça pas travailler bien. Qui m'a dit au dernier gouvernement qui a dit, il c'est un gouvernement pour ces pays. Et qu'on y bagaille sewage pas qu'à travailler bien dans l'hôpital comme ça. Et dernier premier ministre là qui a venu là qui a demandé qui ça qui Universal Healthcare, il a parlé parole ventaille, il a battu, après il c'est un coq la savane. Hein? Monsieur, et tout ça il fait. Tout ça il fait Jean-Pays cette ici. Nous avons là combien de bagailles à l'hôpital Owen King ou l'hôpital là qui brisent manger. Avec bord là qui là, il y a travail web et qui ont mis ça, il y a fait et puis il y a un système air condition, là il y a chaque bagaille, chaque molle, chaque champignon, différents bagailles comme ça, il y a manger et aussi il y a fait chaque l'autre différents bagailles. Comme ça, ils veulent l'argent pour gagner remède pour assurer que la pharmacie n'a pas fermé, qu'on était fermé avant, qu'il y a toujours une remède pour manger des bagailles là, pour ne pas faire autant de temps en accident en emergency qu'on a fait. Comme ça, comme on dit, bagaille là pas fait à présent. Mais le Premier ministre avec ses ministres en cabinet là, a supporté nous en santé pour mener bagaille devant. Je remercie tous ces docteurs qui paient Saint-Jude, tous ces ou paient un Janita, ou paient un Watchman, n'importe qui est à l'hôpital là. Mais aujourd'hui, nous avons parlé des affaires Owen King et Hospital. Et nous remercie tous ces gens qui travaillent là. Ils ont fait un bon travail. Nous faisons une étude avec nous, les gens qui sont venus à l'hôpital là. Si nous parlons de 100 personnes, accouché à 70 personnes qui ont dit qui sont satisfaits. Et qui ont des familles avec gens à l'hôpital là. Mais si là, il y a des bagailles pour manger. Là, il y a des bagailles pour manger. Ça fait santé difficile, compliqué. Mais le gouvernement ça là qui met l'argent qu'on voyait. Nous disons nous travaillons en santé et qu'on chaque fois nous venons pour prêter l'argent c'est pour une bonne raison. Ça pas ça fait m'a dit prêter coq ventard te qu'a fait dernière fois. Ça pas ça fait m'a dit prêter ça là. Nous avons venu pour prendre l'argent pour santé moun. Pour santé moun. Comme ça, moi j'ai supporté ça Premier ministre là venu faire aujourd'hui. Il a croisé chez moi parce que le dernier gouvernement qualité c'est agrément ça là aussi. Et c'est nous qui nous pour venir pour un mop et balayer et balayer la cour et pour cette ici pour imprimer l'expiation. Mais nous avons travaillé, nous pas qu'à la nous pas qu'à molli, avec nous avons travaillé avec le cabinet là, avec tous ces gens, c'est l'hôpital là, c'est docteur, c'est nos là, pour faire santé primaire cette ici. Merci, M. Speaker.
The member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to the motion before us and to start off, Mr. Speaker, by expressing my absolute confidence in the Minister of Health, the member for Beaufort North. I saw the member from Castries North across, who himself was a former Minister of Health, nodding his head repeatedly while the Honorable Minister was speaking. And I'm sure he can appreciate the challenges and the difficulties of managing the health sector and the clarity with which the Minister expressed the approach being used and the dedication of the various teams that he lead in dealing with some of the issues that we face in the health sector. One must admit that he's doing a fantastic job. Mr. Speaker, I think both the member from Vieux-Fort South and the member from Vieux-Fort North in many ways really express the deep-seated revulsion we have to the action that we have to do today. Not the guarantee to ensure the Millennium Medical Complex can get the money necessary for the overdraft and for the capital injection needed, but the fact that we have to pay to NHL the outstanding amounts to them. But Mr. Speaker, I think the Minister of Health, the member for Vieux-Fort North, made a very important point that, and I think that the member from Strozel-Saltibus asked, why did you all not contest the contract? And I would want to respond to that, because it's a very, very valid question. A very valid question, and one which I think we owe, an explanation as to why not, and the minister attempted to do so. But I would want also to add, to the explanation that he gave. But we must start off recognizing that this is yet again another example of the gross mismanagement that took place under the leadership of the member from Mico South between 2016 and 2021. And the member from Vieux-Fort South started to point out some of those actions that were taken by him, Mr. Speaker, because this decision that we have to take today is painful, really and truly painful. And Mr. Speaker, when we do come back to this House in the next couple of weeks or so to report on the performance of the economy, it would really expose, and I'm sure the member from Castries is, when he finishes his presentation, to show you the tremendous effort that has to be made to get Central back on course. And it was really exposed to us in March 2020 when COVID came, that we were being told in February with the best performing, things were happening in a manner which made us the admiration of everybody else, and he was boasting, and his team, unfortunately a member from Strozel-Saltibus is part of that team, was boasting. And with COVID, within 1 month, we were told that we were bankrupt. And we asked the question, how can you be managing the affairs of state in such a manner, and within a short space of time, one shock, and we were flat at terre? Mr. Speaker, flat at terre. Well, I said flat at terre because we were flat, But Mr. Speaker, it really exposes. And he asked a question about what is universal health care. And you heard the Minister of Health, the member of Vieux-Fort North, and the Prime Minister is seized of this requirement that we have to address the issue of health financing in this country. There's no running away from it. There's no running away. And you'd have heard attempts that were made. I think the member from Castries North had pointed out what had happened in his time, what had happened under a previous Labour Party government, the efforts under the leadership of the member from Soufrière, Force-Jacques, efforts that had been made to get a system in place where our people can get affordable health care in this country. We all know as parliamentary reps the challenges when people come to us for assistance, for a CT scan, to buy their medication, for all different kinds of medical assistance they need. We must agree in this country on a mechanism to raise the necessary financing that will be dedicated to financing the healthcare services in this country. And it is now the historic responsibility of the St. Lucia Labour Party, when in government, to do so. We cannot run away from it anymore. We cannot continue to have our people requiring health care and it cannot be provided because they don't have money, parliamentary representatives don't have the money to give them, or government just cannot afford to pay it. We must find a solution. And all the citizens of this country must support efforts and come together and contribute towards a mechanism that would allow us to finance the health needs of this country. And the member from Vieux-Fort North explained all that they are doing in the health sector. Where is the money going to come from? He explained to you that they're providing $5 million worth of services in a month, but collecting $400,000. That's not sustainable. It's not. How can the people in my constituency, in Cicero, in Marigo, in Bassajeff, individuals who need MRIs, they need CT scans, how are they going to get it? How? The government must assist them. But how is the government going to get the monies to do so? And this Labour Party will have to be bold enough to come up with a solution to that problem. We must. And I'm sure all of us are single-minded in that approach. We must find a solution. It cannot continue to happen. And I hope the members opposite, when the time comes, will be able to stand up in a very mature way and support the efforts that we will have to make sure we can finance health services in this country. The member from Strozel, Saltibus, asked the question earlier. In fact, he made a statement when he spoke. And he said about borrowing. And he's right. We've never opposed borrowing on this side. We never did. But we said, if you do it responsibly, for the right reasons, we will support it. But we were of the firm mind that the borrowing that was taking place under the previous administration was not being targeted and used in the best possible way. We were firm in our minds on that. We stood up against the Don Lockerbie contract. We stood up against numerous efforts at borrowing, not because we wanted to oppose, but because we were not satisfied that the best practices were in place. And today is evidence of that. Today is evidence. Because somebody needs to explain to me, and I think the member from Beaufort South started to do it. How is it we can reach a point where we are paying consultants $1 million a month, and to do what? Now the issue is not the paying of consultants. And the member from Beaufort South went through some of the services that had to be provided. Paying for press releases, paying for human resource plan. Those are things we can do locally. We have enough competencies to do it. Why did we have to pay $1 million a month in consultancy fees? I'm not going to oppose if they would require to pay consultancy services for the preparation of sophisticated operation manuals and standard operating procedures for areas that we may not have the competencies for. One is not against that. We're not. We're not. How do you include in a contract some of those services that were required to be provided and pay $1 million a month for 24 months? How? Explain that to me. But the member of Microsoft from Microsoft knows why he's not here. He knows why he's not here. Because he would have had to answer that question. Yeah. He would have to answer that question. How it is $1 million a month. But let's go into some more detail on this. The contract was signed in October 2020, in the middle of COVID. Now sit down and reflect, gentlemen. Remember during that time what was happening in this country? Remember the mood of the country? Remember the threat we faced during the pandemic? People could not eat. 15,000 hospitality workers laid off. Just think about that. Let's go back. Let's go back. Remember how everybody seemed focused on fighting the virus? But in the middle of that, you sign a contract for $25 million in the dead of night. What was the thinking going on in cabinet? How do you sit in cabinet? Well, I've since learned that it never went to cabinet. They didn't even know about it. So how does the best person to be Prime Minister of St. Lucia, and he said that he would give up if he knew there was a better person to lead St. Lucia. Can you imagine that? He would give up the fight for leadership of the United Workers' Party if he knew that there was a better person to lead St. Lucia. Think about that. And in the middle of COVID, in October 2020, when everyone is preoccupied in basic survival, not sure of what's going to happen in the next few months, nobody knew what was going to happen, but you signed a contract to pay $1 million a month to consultants. Right, yeah, and that's exactly at that time public officers have been told they'll have to take a cut in salary. Now, explain to me the mindset of the individual who does that. He would not even take it to cabinet because he knew even in a cabinet that he had, there would probably be a couple of persons of conscience who might say not to do it, at least not do it as yet. I'd want to believe the member from Strozel Saltibus would not support this in the middle of COVID. Mr. Speaker, you know, I have had the opportunity to read the report of the committee that was asked to review the contract, and the member from Strozel asked, why did we not contest it? When you read the report actually recommends that government pays the money. Now it places you in a very difficult position where you ask technical people and you ask the board to review the performance of the consultants and to make recommendations, and they recommend that you should pay the money. It's difficult as a government to now say, I am not paying the money. You know, it really ties your hand a bit, and you know, you have to be very cautious moving forward. How do you decide that the technical people who did the assessment and said you should pay, you are still not paying? And of course, the Prime Minister is always very cautious that the reputation of St. Lucia means a lot. We should not necessarily go about ending agreements, deciding not to pay because of the mistakes of the past, and that we should be honorable in our dealings. But Mr. Speaker, when you read that report, Mr. Speaker, it tells you so much more. I just made a point about this being signed during the middle of COVID. The report itself says that, in essence, they were not even prepared for that consultancy. These are the technical people who did the assessments said, we were not ready, in essence, for this. Because I can understand why they're not ready, because everybody is focused on COVID. You cannot decide to bring in consultants, to do the kind of work when people are concerned about people dying in the hospital with COVID. So these consultants being paid $1 million a month are churning out documents, draft documents, to the heads of the various units at the hospital, but nobody seems to have been responding to those documents because they are not focused on that. So the report speaks of numerous deliverables, but all of them still in draft form because they were submitted, yes, and the consultants can claim that they did submit documents, and therefore if they submitted it and you did not review it, you can't blame the consultants. So we have to honor the agreement because they did submit them, and in the review it is said that they were submitted. As to whether or not they meet the benchmark and the standards that one would require is a different issue. But the fact is they were submitted. But nobody at Millennium Heights are preoccupied with this because this is COVID time. This is COVID time. So what do you expect? Our people are not ready for this. And even more so, the report makes the point that some of the outputs are preliminary outputs that were provided, obviously, before COVID. So they seem to have been, because they were paid 125,000 US for assessment of what's needed to be done. They were paid about 100, if you look at the contract, they were paid about 125,000 US for an assessment of what has to be done. So obviously an assessment was done, and they have some preliminary ideas of what outputs that are required. That had not even, from reading the report, it does not even seem that that was finalized. So the staff is preoccupied in saving St. Lucia, and there it is, a prime minister is giving them a contract to sign. There it is, the prime minister giving them a contract to sign. And they admitted that, you know, there were no systems in place for that kind of consultancy. Some of the preliminary ideas we came up with were never finalized, but it made its way into the contract. It's almost as if you had asked somebody to put a list of all the things, or they probably use a document of the previous transition team with the list of all that is needed to be done to complete the functioning of the hospital, and they took it and just gave it to those guys. You know, yeah. So simple things like human resource management plan, they probably would have had that listed as necessary for the functioning of the hospital. A proper communication plan, that would have been listed. So you effectively took all the outputs of the transition team that had prepared, gave it to the consultants, and gave them a contract. And meanwhile, everyone at Millennium Heights is preoccupied with saving St. Lucians. And documents have been produced in drafts, sent to them for review, so it can be finalized. They don't have time for that. And then life goes on. And the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, member for Mico South, will say that he was the best thing that happened in St. Lucia. You know, and you know, you really have to read the report, Mr. Speaker. You have to find, you'll have to find a way, Mr. Speaker, at some point, I'm not sure, to read the report, because it's very brief, but it tells a very telling story of what happened. We've not even been present. You can imagine what happened under the leadership of the member for Mico South. Why wouldn't one individual, because I'm told it never went to cabinet for cabinet approval, never. And the member from Beaufort South made the point earlier on, in the decision to save the hotel at Pigeon Point and save jobs for St. Lucians, there was a cabinet conclusion authorizing the course of action. Where is the cabinet conclusion authorizing the decision to sign the contract? Where is it? So one individual can cause this country to have to pay $25 million for consulting services, more than half of which is not needed and can be prepared by any department in the hospital. The HR department can prepare the plan. If you have an HR manager for a huge institution like this and they cannot prepare an HR management plan, then it's not worth it. If you cannot get somebody in St. Lucia to prepare press releases and to prepare a communication plan, it's not worth it, as was pointed out. Basic maintenance manuals that can be provided by your maintenance department. I went through the contract trying to figure out how much of this was really necessary for us to have foreign outsourcing of the expertise to do it. I'm not saying St. Lucians have all the expertise. What kind of prime minister does that? What kind of prime minister? $25 million. $25 million. And most of that time, they were working during COVID. The report also speaks of a number of clinical physicians and whatnot that were supposed to come to St. Lucia and never came. Never came. Never came. Now, it does point out the contract does not say they had to come to St. Lucia, but I would want to believe they were supposed to come to St. Lucia and visit for a particular purpose. How? And in reading the report, I can see why they would recommend that government should pay. I can see why. I don't entirely agree, but I can see why. Because at the end of the day, drafts were prepared, they were sent to the hospital. It is not the consultant's fault that we did not review it, we did not finalize it. It's not their fault that we did not meet all our obligations for them to do their work properly. Whether or not you agree they should be doing it is a different issue. But St. Lucia taxpayers have to end up paying for it. St. Lucian taxpayers. And you're going to tell me in 2 weeks' time, the member from Mico South will stand in this house and boast that we do not know what we're doing on this side. That he was the best minister of finance they've had. He is the best prime minister they've had. And we are jokers. And he alone can do it. This is another example of that recklessness. I kept saying to him that he was building a better St. Lucia. It wasn't a better St. Lucia. And a member from Beaufort South did some of it. The last time I tried to do some of it, we don't even have enough time for everybody to lay down the list of all misdeeds. No, there's so many. There's so many, Mr. Speaker. And we still have to come to this house to deal with the biggest one of them all, the Ranura International Airport Redevelopment Project. That one, Mr. Speaker, is even scarier than St. Jude's and scarier than this one. And the member from Castle Central gave you an insight into the contract for the Orange Grove Mall. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, how? And I guess the member from Strozel Saltibus really needs, Mr. Speaker, at some point, you know, to maybe answer some of those questions if the member from Microsoft is not there. Because I don't know that he can get away with just sitting down in the house and keeping quiet. If, Mr. Speaker, the member is not in to answer for the misdeeds of the government, and you are the only one, honorable member, maybe you should speak up and answer. Maybe you should. It cannot continue that whenever we have to debate something as important as this, the honorable member can excuse himself. And I've said in this house before, Mr. Speaker, the practice by the honorable member of speaking and then walking out so he cannot be challenged need to stop. You have, if you're speaking in the house, you have to participate in the proceedings of the house. You cannot wait just to speak and take your ball and go away with it. And likewise, honorable member, I don't know it's enough for you to just sit in the house and keep quiet. Give us an explanation of how it is a government of St. Lucia can cause the people of St. Lucia to have to find, well, we've already paid half, to pay the other half. I think it's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. And you probably have to find a way to say to the honorable member, when we adjourn the house and we state the date of the adjournment, every effort must be made. But he cannot say he's away on state duties, because he's not Prime Minister anymore. Maybe he should understand that he's not Prime Minister anymore. And maybe that's the hardest thing for him to accept. So I've read the report, Mr. Speaker, from the review team. And I must say to you, if I had more time, I'll probably read some of the direct quotes from it, Mr. Speaker, because it tells a very, very powerful story of what happened. Pardon? To make it a document, I can share with you a copy if you want. I have no difficulty with doing that. I'm sure you can get both the contract and the report to read. You have the contract. So, Mr. Speaker, as I end, I want to come back to that central point of healthcare financing, that this Honorable House has to put some focus, some attention on how it is we're going to finance the health care needs of our citizens. It has reached a point, Mr. Speaker, and those who've been there before me, the member from Beaufort South, Castries North, Castries East, who've been there long before me, Beaufort North, would have suffered a lot more than I have, but it is painful for me when so many of my constituents come to me looking for assistance to finance and to pay for their healthcare needs. I am prepared for tough decision making. I am prepared, Mr. Speaker, to support an initiative. And I can say to you, even when we were in opposition and the last government was speaking of insurance for St. Lucia and healthcare insurance, we were prepared to have an open and frank conversation and have a collective approach to the financing of healthcare. And our record speaks for itself. The member from Beaufort South, if my recollection is right, had set up a committee or proposed a committee of the House to look at it and asked the member from Castries North to sit on it, to chair it. And the new leader of the opposition, or the new leader of the United Workers' Party, denied and said he should not, because the member from Beaufort South saw the criticality of coming up with solutions to finance healthcare in this country and wanted a bipartisan approach to it. So I'm hoping we can do the same. I don't know. I can continue to spend 3 years until the next election and beyond, Mr. Speaker, for us to have to face the daily requests from our constituents for simple healthcare needs, Mr. Speaker. And it's getting worse, Mr. Speaker. So I want to put up front my preparedness for us to come up and debate a solution in this House to solve this problem. And today exposes that. The Minister of Health in his presentation exposed the challenges that are faced in sorting out the problems of the healthcare sector in St. Lucia. So, Mr. Speaker, do accept my support for the motion before us, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there is not much left to be said. Members who spoke gave a thorough analysis on the merits and demerits of why we are paying this bill, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I just want to make a few quick points. One, Mr. Speaker, on the difference in the procedural manner in which the government, we do our thing, we run government, how we take our decisions, and the way the former government did it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, anytime we look at something, whether it's St. Jude's, whether it's the airport, whether it's whatever, we come with our own opinions, our own ideas, but we allow independent people to look at it, to crystallize the ideas, and come back to us, and we take decisions. And all these decisions are taken at a cabinet level. Share collective responsibility. Each member in the cabinet knows why we did it, we discussed it, came to a consensus, and we came to a consensus, Mr. Speaker. But when you find a situation where a government can spend $22 million, $1 million a month, without consultation with the cabinet of St. Lucia, it's not in, without consultation with the cabinet, Mr. Speaker. It shows you the arrogance and the way, the disrespect for the people of St. Lucia. You've just decided that you want to do it. You're the Prime Minister, so you just spend the money. Yeah, you decide you want to move an airport from one part of the country to the other. You just move it. You forget about everything else. You've just decided that you're going to move the airport because you want to do it, Mr. Speaker. It shows you the different in styles. St. Jude Hospital, you decide that what's there is not good, you just change your mind, put it, leave it there, and you spend $118 million to do something else. Without any plan, you just decide that you're doing it. Mr. Speaker, that's the basic difference. And all the people of St. Lucia understand and see the basic difference between these two ideas of governance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the corporate credit card, it's going to be used to pay supplies. Like sometimes the hospital wants medication, they want pharmaceuticals that they want immediately, and so you use a card to pay it. It's not going to be used for daily expenses, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, talking about the health funding, health financing, which all the members, the member for Castries South and the member for Castries North spoke of, Mr. Speaker. We have to review the relationship between the National Insurance Corporation, the OKU, and the government. There seems to be some confusion as to what role the NIC must play in health financing. There seems to be, we need to have a discussion with the NIC on that topic. We also have a discussion with insurance companies, Mr. Speaker. The health insurance companies. Mr. Speaker, talking about health insurance companies, I want to urge people to read health insurance policies before they take them. It's very important, because if you do not read your health insurance policy, you might find yourself in a situation where you've incurred costs, and when you expect to be reimbursed, you are not reimbursed because your policy did not cater for that. So in terms of health insurance, there also is a situation where the hospital itself must look at the relationship they have with the health insurance companies. And I think that at some point we have to look at that relationship between health insurance policies and how these insurance companies, how they reimburse people when people incur expenses for health-related charges, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, because it happens very often. I mean, you spend $100 for your medical, you expect to be reimbursed 95, you reimburse 60 or 50 or even 40, and they are all hidden clauses why you did not get paid. So we have to review that. Government must closely. We know the insurance companies must make a profit. We know, but the people of the country should not be shortchanged when it comes to getting reimbursed for their after they've paid their insurance premiums, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we heard about the waste of money, the $22 million of waste of money, and at that time, it was being considered to cut the salaries of civil servants. Mr. Speaker, let me tell civil servants now that at the end of March, they'll be getting their back pay as promised by the government. They're going to get Mr. Speaker, because we expect them to perform, but the thing is their right, and this government, being a government that is always interested in the welfare of workers, think they should be remunerated. As promised, they were going to get their back pay, as we said, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, and finally, where the Deputy Prime Minister spoke about in terms of the reputation of St. Lucia, I just want to read a letter from a lawyer based on that debt which the government owed. Because the debt wasn't owed by the member from Mico South, the former Prime Minister. It was owed by the government and people of St. Lucia. And let me read something that says, Mr. Speaker, throughout last year, our client has received many promises for payment of this amount due, but to date, it remains outstanding. Our clients are highly regulated in their home state of India, and as a foreign contract invoice for consultancy services, the time delay in payment has attracted the attention of the regulatory authorities, for which they may become exposed to regulatory sanctions and penalties, and by the Securities Exchange Board of India and the Reserve Bank of India. So there was some reputational risk for the government of St. Lucia, and we believe that we must protect our reputation, Mr. Speaker. But rest assured that the government has not forgotten its pledge to bring the truth to light as far as that government spending, that recklessness is concerned. But as we always do, we want to take our time and do it properly, Mr. Speaker. We want to do it with due process. We want to take our time, because it's not a witch hunt. It's not a witch hunt. And you will not find any one of us making outlandish statements that can be used against us, Mr. Speaker. I want to repeat in this Honorable House that Mr. Bob Lindquist has been engaged. He has been engaged by the government of St. Lucia to continue the probe into the Hiwanoro International Airport situation, and also he'll be asked to probe into some other things, some other issues he'll be asked to probe into, Mr. Speaker, because we believe that the truth must come to light, Mr. Speaker. And regardless of all the noise you hear on the outside, all the threats and all the bravado and all the lies and misinformation, Mr. Speaker, just be patient, take your time. There was a loud hue and cry for the Bob Lindquist report. I sat here and I heard on the other side, where is the Lindquist report? I want the Lindquist report, I want it. Mr. Speaker, time will tell. We were in government, you were in government for 5 years. You did not ask for the Lindquist report, you could have found it. Now we are going to ask Mr. Lindquist, please, to complete this report. And when this report is completed, we are going to take the necessary steps as dictated by the report, following law, the rule of law, not a witch hunt, but a search for the truth, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to guarantee a line of credit from First National Bank St. Lucia Limited, the bank, to the Millennium Heights Medical Complex in the amount of EC $23.050 million, consisting of A, an overdraft limit of EC $6.5 million to assist with working capital requirements, B, a loan of EC $5 million to assist with operational expenses for the purchase of new equipment, C, a loan of EC $11.4 million to satisfy a debt of the Ministry of Finance, and D, a corporate credit card with a limit of EC $150,000 to assist with monthly expenses. Be it further resolved that for the overdraft limit of EC $6.5 million, the term of the overdraft is for 12 months, the interest payable at 6% per annum, subject to a change in line with the general level of interest rates, excess rate of 17%. For the loan of EC $5 million, the term of the loan is for 180 months. Repayment is $36,985 monthly, with effect from 1 month after drawdown of the last payment plus any outstanding principal and interest due 180 months after full drawdown. Interest is payable at a rate of 4% per annum, subject to a change in line with the general level of fluctuating rates. For the loan of EC $11.4 million, the term is for 180 months. Repayment is for $84,324 monthly, with effect from 1 month after drawdown, the last payment plus any outstanding principal and interest due 180 months after full drawdown. Interest is payable at a rate of 4% per annum, subject to a change in line with the general level of fluctuating rates. D, the corporate credit card for a limit of EC $150,000. Repayment is monthly. Interest is payable in accordance with visa terms and conditions. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bills, Prime Minister and Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Credit Reporting.
Credit reporting.
Prime Minister, Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for suspension of Standing Order 48-2 to allow the bill to go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honourable members, the question is that Standing Order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Prime Minister to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Leave is granted. Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, just for clarification purposes, as some skeptics may want to say, that why is a bill of such magnitude, of such importance, going through all the stages at one sitting, Mr. Speaker? That exactly is not the case, Mr. Speaker. The bill had to go for this. We had to ask the House for the bill to go for all the stages, because the bill was actually laid in a previous sitting, but its time has lapsed, Mr. Speaker, in the last parliamentary session. And since it's coming from an old parliamentary session to a new parliamentary session, we had to ask the permission at the House. Had to ask the House permission for it to go through all the stages. For out of the abundance of clarity, and to make it clear, the credit reporting bill is not being rushed through the House in all its stages at this sitting. It is not. It was here from the last session, and in fact it has been in discussion from the year 2020, but it came into this honorable House for during the last session, and because the time lapsed, we had to bring it again. But it has been in discussion for a long time. In fact, a special select committee of the House of Assembly was appointed, Mr. Speaker, in 2020, and it reported on September the 9th, 2022, to deal with the credit reporting bill, Mr. Speaker. So it's not a new bill that has come into this House for all this sitting at this session, Mr. Speaker. I just thought it was important that I made this clear, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB, which is the monetary authority that deals with monetary matters of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, Mr. Speaker, in collaboration with the International Finance Corporation, the IFC. And Mr. Speaker, you will know that the IFC is a body from the World Bank that had a very strange relationship with the last government when they prepared the PPP for the last government as it related to the Unero International Airport. And the last government, the former Prime Minister, in his wisdom, thought that his idea, his combination of the Forester Management Consultancy and himself was the best combination for Unero Airport. And he thought that these experts, the experts from Forester, had a lot more had more expertise, the FMC had a lot more expertise in the management of airports, hospitals, etc., Mr. Speaker. So they changed their mind and they literally chased the IFC out of St. Lucia, and it caused us to have to pay $1 million US for our actions, Mr. Speaker. But the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank fought different, and they worked with the IFC in the establishment of a credit bureau for the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, Mr. Speaker. The Eastern Caribbean, the ECCB, Mr. Speaker, facilitated the drafting of the ECCU credit reporting bill and regulations to establish a regulatory and supervisory framework to support an advanced credit reporting system in the ECCU member countries. The ECCU member countries, Mr. Speaker, are Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia and St. Vincent, Mr. Speaker. And incidentally, all the islands in the ECCU have passed the credit reporting bill except St. Lucia. The purpose of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions. B, to enable credit information sharing and reporting. C, to provide for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services. D, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers. And E, to provide for a single space in the regulation of credit reporting. Mr. Speaker, the benefits of implementing the credit reporting system is expected to result in improved credit risk management, increased access to credit, and responsible lending and financial stability. Mr. Speaker, the talk of a credit bureau has been around from the year 2016, Mr. Speaker. From the year 2016, the Attorney General had been asked to comment on the bill coming from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, that bill has a long history. In 2020, by Cabinet Conclusion 1137 of 2020, the bill was approved for transmission to Parliament and was subsequently tabled for first reading in the House of Assembly on 29 September 2020. On its second reading in the House of Assembly on 24 November 2020, however, because of the bill's far-reaching implications, the bill was referred to a special select committee for consideration. The interim report of the special select committee was laid in Parliament on the 15th December 2020 and highlighted some of the concerns from the Department of Finance, the Attorney General's Chambers, the Lucia Bankers Association, and other stakeholders. A decision was made at the 15th December 2020 sitting of Parliament to recommit the bill for consideration by a special select committee. In 2022, after meeting the ECCB and other stakeholders, the Attorney General submitted to the ECCB further comments, including the observations in the interim report for consideration and transmission to other member countries. In 2023, the Attorney General's Chambers sought an update from the ECCB on the status of the comments. By letter, the Governor of the ECCB indicated that the ECCU Credit Bureau, established under the bill, will be launched soon in the 6 other ECCU member states, and therefore urged St. Lucia to pass the bill in its current form, as the enactment of a uniform bill throughout the ECCU member countries will pave the way for the establishment of the ECCU Credit Bureau. The exact text of the bill is therefore adopted in each ECCU member country. As I said before, Mr. Speaker, the bill lapsed as it had not been passed in the parliamentary session in which it was first laid, and as a result must be relayed in this current session. The bill makes provision for preliminary matters such as definitions that are used in the bill. For example, credit, credit bureau, credit information, data subject, and personal information are words defined in the bill. To ensure the administration of the bill, Mr. Speaker, the Central Bank is responsible for granting licenses to and imposing sanctions for contravention of the bill on credit bureaus and other credit information providers. Additionally, the bill sets out the licensing requirements for a credit bureau. The bill also captures matters relating to credit reporting. For instance, the activities that a credit bureau is allowed to engage in the requirement for the consent of data subjects before credit information is shared with a third party, the types of data that can be submitted or disclosed, the uses of credit information data, and retention periods for credit information to be kept. The supervisory powers of the Central Bank to conduct inspections and make orders to amend or restrict the use of incomplete or non-compliant credit information is also provided under the bill. Additionally, a credit bureau is required to provide audited financial statements and other compliance documents to the Central Bank. In cases of negligent non-compliance with the bill provides for the civil liability of a credit bureau or credit information provider to a data subject. A credit reporting review commission is appointed under this bill. The objectives of the commission and the procedures for an aggrieved data subject to submit an application to that commission are provided for under the bill. Additionally, the constitution, operations, and procedures of the commission are set out on the Schedule 2 of the bill. A person aggrieved by a decision or order of the central bank or the commission may, within 20 days of the date of the decision or order, make an appeal to the High Court or Court of Appeal. Miscellaneous matters including the creation of offences and penalties, immunity provisions, and powers of the Minister of Finance to make regulations and amend the schedules to the bill are also provided. I'll read that again, Mr. Speaker. Miscellaneous matters including the creation of offences and penalties, immunity provisions, and the powers of the Minister of Finance to make regulations and amend the schedules of the bill are also provided in the bill. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, it's important for St. Lucia to fulfill its obligations to the ECCU, Mr. Speaker. We cannot keep the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union back without ensuring that bill is passed, Mr. Speaker, because the entire structure for the Credit Bureau has been created, and St. Lucia needs to get in line with the other countries, because a credit bureau, Mr. Speaker, is essential so that we can have evidence-based decision making as far as credit is concerned. Too many times people get credit because of who they know, or do not get credit because of who they do not know. So the credit bureau will ensure that there's a framework under which you can be analyzed and so you can get a credit score. And I'm sure on television you've seen many times people talking about the credit score. So this credit reporting bill give us a credit score. So when there can be an objective manner of getting credit from financial institutions, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers, and to provide for a single space in the regulation of credit and reporting, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the various parts of the bill, Part 1 of the bill, Clause 1 provides for the short term commencement, Mr. Speaker. Part 2 provides for administrative matters. Parts 3 and 4 relates to the licensing of credit bureaus, the addresses being the application for a license. It lays out how that's done, Mr. Speaker. Part 4 of the bill deals with activities relating to credit reporting, and it says that a credit bureau may only engage in activities permitted under the bill or regulations. So the credit bureau must work according to the specified bills, the specified regulations, Mr. Speaker. It also says the consent of a data subject must be obtained before related credit information is shared with a third party. And that is clear in Clause 18, Mr. Speaker. It says that you must inform the person, Clause 18 of the bill, it reads credit reports, Clause 18, Mr. Speaker. I want to read it because I think it is important, Mr. Speaker. Clause 18. A person requirement for content, page 18.1. A person may not inquire on the credit information respecting any data subject without first obtaining the consent of the data subject. That's important, Mr. Speaker. So if the credit bureau wants information from you, they must seek your consent before. So there can't be there ought not to be no underhand, no MacGyver type operation. You have to get the information of the data subject Mr. Speaker, before you get the information. And 18.2, a credit information provider may disclose to credit bureau both negative and positive credit information without first obtaining the content from a data subject if the credit information provider provides notice to the data subject that credit and personal information may be disclosed in the credit to a credit bureau. I want to read that again. A credit information provider may disclose to a credit bureau both negative and positive credit information without first obtaining consent from a data subject if the credit information provider provides notice to the data subject that credit and personal information may be disclosed to a credit bureau, Mr. Speaker. So, Section 1, a person may not inquire on the credit information respecting any data subject without first obtaining the consent of the subject. And when the subject gives consent, Mr. Speaker, then the person providing the information to the credit bureau may give both either positive or negative information on the data subject, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a credit bureau has a duty to maintain records and credit information under clause 24 of the bill, and the credit bureau is permitted to outsource the processing of credit information subject to the approval of the central bank. That's on clause 24, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, part 5 of the bill contains provisions on the central bank's supervisory powers. The central bank is empowered to gather information, carry out inspections, and enter and search premises. The central bank may by order amend or restrict the use of incomplete or non-compliant credit information. The costs of an inspection or inquiry are borne by the person on whose behalf it was conducted. A credit bureau is required to submit the audit of financial statements and other compliance documents to the central bank. Also, the central bank is empowered to apply to the High Court for an order against a person who contravenes the bill or regulations. And it goes the other way around, Mr. Speaker. It goes the other way around in that the person aggrieved by a decision or the central bank or the commission may within 20 days of the date of the decision or order make an appeal to the High Court or Court of Appeal. Mr. Speaker, I know there have been some concerns about the power of the central bank as far as that is concerned, and I guess these can be discussed and looked at some later stage, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, part 4 of the bill, this clause provides for the civil liability of a person who causes injury to a data subject by reason of that person's non-compliance with the bill of regulations. That's important, Mr. Speaker. That's very important. You are civil liability of a person. So if you cause any injury, you cause the provider has a civil liability, Mr. Speaker, subject by reason of the person's non-compliance with the bill of regulations. If you don't follow the rules, Mr. Speaker, you are civilly liable. Part 7 of the bill provides for matters relating to the review of a decision of a credit bureau or the central bank, and the appeals processes is addressed in Part 8 of the bill, Mr. Speaker. Part 9 of the bill relates to provides for miscellaneous matters, like clause 47 of the bill empower the central bank to enter into agreements with other entities with respect to enforcement of the bill or activities related to credit reporting, Mr. Speaker. Clause 48 of the bill, the central bank is required to keep confidential any information it obtains as a result of an inspection. Clause 49 provides for the admissibility of a certificate of the central bank in evidence in respect to the prosecution of an offense under the bill, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a rather comprehensive bill that has been thoroughly debated, that has been spoken about. There are some clauses that have caused some level of concern, Mr. Speaker. But as I said earlier, that bill has been passed in the entire region, and St. Lucia should not keep the region back. but it also has some advantages, Mr. Speaker, in that it gives, as I said before, a scientific way of credit ratings. There's a scientific way where credit can be rated, Mr. Speaker. So it means that a young person can begin the financial discipline. And talking about financial discipline, Mr. Speaker, we as a people have to learn some financial discipline, Mr. Speaker. We found ourselves in a situation where, because of the availability of credit cards and payday loans, many people are living beyond their means, Mr. Speaker. We must get into the discipline of financial planning. We must get into the discipline of saving, Mr. Speaker. And there is a trend in St. Lucia by some people, Mr. Speaker, that using credit cards to pay credit cards. As soon as you get yourself in that situation, you are nearly at a point of no return. To use, and I'm sure Memphis as a banker knows that, once you get to a situation where you have to use credit cards to pay credit cards, you are in trouble, Mr. Speaker. So this system of credit rating will instill a level of discipline in people, particularly people starting off, young people starting off, Mr. Speaker. But again, you can't instill discipline in people if you do not give them the tools. And again, I want to make a plea to the banks for this problem in opening accounts in this country. This opening accounts where you have to have 5 pieces of ID to open an account in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. If not 5, too many pieces of ID. There is no reason why a young person cannot open an account with their regular ID card. There's no reason why a school leaver can't open an account with their regular ID card. There's absolutely no reason, Mr. Speaker. So the idea that our islands are sources of money laundering and etc. is something that we must try our best to dispel, Mr. Speaker. And again, we are in the next motion bill will be the registration of supervised entities, where again we are forced to pass legislation for things that we probably do not do. But that is the financial architecture that we live in, and if we have to protect the reputation of our country, the reputation of our jurisdiction, we have to pass it, Mr. Speaker. So I urge members to look at the relevance and the necessity of the credit reporting Act, for the credit reporting bill, Mr. Speaker, and to give their consent. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that the credit reporting bill be read a second. The member for Swazel Saltibus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I dive into the contents of the bill before us, I just want to observe, Mr. Speaker, that we had a very significant or serious anomaly this morning, or whatever time we started Parliament, and I suspect the reason for that was either because of the time we started or because of the absence of the member for Brusley. But we forgot to give the kudos to our very own who has continued breaking records. And I'm sure you will make a statement of that when you're closing. But we must always ensure, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is very correct with his preamble, because I happen to have been part of that select committee along with himself and member for Castries South. And, the member for Castries South reminded me this morning that there was a number of matters that we had identified and highlighted that we would have loved to have had some further discussion. And that was brought to the attention of the central bank, but they were of the opinion that should we make this adjustment, it would have to make the complete round again with all the other countries, and that would be a further delay. And they're suggesting, that we go forward, and then we can address some of these matters after. I suspect the member for Beaufort South will take up that particular position on my behalf. But Mr. Speaker, while countries progress, that kind of legislation is expected. And my concern has always been, as we progress, there are a certain set of people that always drop out of the system. And I anticipate that will happen with the passing of this legislation. And, I was but advising the member for Beaufort South. I remember at one point in a previous life where a particular international bank was getting rid of a number of people who had deposits below a certain threshold. And these people kind of became unbankable at the time, and they gravitated, of course, to our local institution. And I suspect, Mr. Speaker, that with this bill, we may find some people falling below the radar, Mr. Speaker. And a significant education will have to be taken up by the banks, by the central bank, Bankers Association, with regards to teaching people how to maintain their credit rating and how to ensure that they're in the loop, Mr. Speaker. Some of the immediate concerns that I have is particularly with the advent of COVID, that when these credit houses are established, I'm not sure how far back they will go, but we're hoping that the period of COVID which is an anomaly, will not be taken into consideration because of the number of hardships that many people face during that time. I'm also concerned with regards to disputes that may be existing between individuals and banks or utility companies or HP houses, Mr. Speaker, and how that will affect people's credit ratings. And I'm hoping that matter could also be addressed when the central bank, decides to launch. The whole issue of confidentiality as well, Mr. Speaker, is a serious one. We know we've all heard where people sell information, to other parties, and that house is a house that will be a repose of a lot of confidential information, and the protection of that data is quite important, Mr. Speaker. But all that being said, Mr. Speaker, I believe it's the direction that has to be taken to ensure that quick turnaround in decision making and the best decision making is taken by our financial institutions. It will curb on a lot of the the bad decisions that are made because of also people who give incorrect information, Mr. Speaker. And so I do support the bill, but I do look forward for additional discussion to address some of the concerns that were highlighted when we met as a select committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Beaufort South.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, at the very outset, let me say that I sympathize with the comments of the Prime Minister and a member for Castries East regarding the status of this bill and the fact that the bill has been enacted in other member states of the currency union. But despite my sympathy, my understanding, I do have fundamental problems with this legislation, and I will articulate my issues with the legislation, but at the same time concede that on this occasion my voice will be added to those who support the legislation. But I specify for me on this occasion. Mr. Speaker, the member for Swazel Saldovas is correct and so too is the member for Castries East, that we have to keep up with the times. And St. Lucians, in truth and in fact, will constantly hear about persons who need to improve their credit score in the United States so they may access loans and credit cards. And they see the advertisements all the time. And in fairness, the idea of a credit bureau to deal with those issues, to provide that kind of information, has been talked about in this house for a while. I will not revisit the history of this legislation, adumbrated by the member for Castries East and Prime Minister and the members for Suzelle. But we'll go into a number of issues. One, I want to talk about the procedure used by the central bank in enacting such legislation and what it means to me as a member of parliament and why I reject the approach. Then secondly, Mr. Speaker, I will renew my call for the central bank to understand that there are consumers of banking services in the region and they need to be protected. That has been a constant theme from me, and I will speak about that. Then I will look at the powers of the central bank in the legislation and why I have difficulty with some of those powers. I will also touch on the issue of the aggregation of powers by the central bank in financial matters and the onslaught against ministers of finance in the region, the diminishing role envisaged by the ministers of finance in the region. And then, of course, Mr. Speaker, I will conclude by stating what my position on this supposedly way out that the central bank is offering, that pass the legislation now and they will revisit and then make amendments. You see, Mr. Speaker, there's a history behind that that you need to know. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to touch first of all what the member for Castries East has stated and buttressed by what the member for Suzelle Soldibus has said. I think there's a fundamental problem in how the central bank approaches regional legislation, how it goes about ensuring that legislation is accepted and enacted across the region. And I've seen several examples of it. Mr. Speaker, I too have been part and parcel of that, and I recall my own experiences with the Banking Act, because the Banking Act that governs banks is an act that was introduced during the period 2011-2016, somewhere maybe 2014-15, I think it was. In the aftermath of the near collapse of our own banking system here, and then of course the collapse of the banking system in Anguilla, or collapse of banks in Anguilla and then Antigua. And the situation was so serious that both the IMF and the World Bank came down on the region, insisting that they modernize their laws to cope with the events that seem to have been unfolding. And I recall that I was asked to chair a meeting of ministers of finance and the central bank here in St. Lucia to persuade that this new legislation be enacted. It was this rough legislation. It's still on our statute books because it is legislation, for example, that sought to give the central bank control over who becomes the director and the criteria for the appointment of directors. And then it was legislation that empowered the central bank, for example, to determine things like the rate of savings and to determine, how deposits, etc., should be handled. And I recall, Mr. Speaker, that when we finally agreed on the text of the legislation, there were moans, there were groans, And when the legislation was presented across the region, OECS, some countries rebelled. Antigua rebelled. And Antigua said there's no way that they're going to enact that legislation. They could not accept some of the provisions. And it was left to me, Mr. Speaker, to go and plead and beg on behalf of the central bank to Antigua and elsewhere to persuade them that the situation in the region, in the sub-region, is so delicate that we needed to enact the legislation. And of course, that is where this argument about let us pass the legislation to save the region, and then whatever is problematic, we'll revisit it and amend accordingly. Of course, that never happened until recently, when the central bank wanted to increase its powers even more than what is in that legislation. Then we have a proposed amendment to the Banking Act. Now, Mr. Speaker, since then, we have had this bill, and I believe we have had other legislation. I referred to the amendments. But what is happening, Mr. Speaker, is this, that we are caught in a bind, in that some countries then move ahead to enact the legislation, either because they don't have discerning attorneys general or their lawmaking processes are different. Others hold back because they feel stakeholders have to be consulted. And then, of course, there's such a period of delay that other countries, after their processes, enact, and then, in the case of St. Lucia, we find ourselves in a situation where others have enacted, and then the pressure then turns on us that, look, all other OECS countries have enacted, we are the ones holding back the processes, and therefore, at the end, let us enact, and we will revisit. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have had a recent experience with the banking legislation, and was asked by one of our civil society groups to discuss it with them, and I'm not going to mention which group that was involved, but only to say, Mr. Speaker, that it is there in that engagement, it occurred to me that the procedure is all wrong. I think what should happen, and the central bank should be told so, that where they are proposing regional legislation, what needs to be done is that the draft legislation should be circulated to all stakeholders in advance. Then assimilate the comments of the stakeholders, and after that has been done, stimulating all the stakeholders, meeting the stakeholders if it is necessary, because it has happened before, and I notice this central bank is not doing it as they should. After that process, then the legislation could be submitted to Parliament for review. Now, why do I object, and why I'm objecting so strenuously? Mr. Speaker, it has nothing to do with the fact that I was a former Minister of Finance, although my subsequent comments has to do with that. But it has to do with the fact that as a member of this Parliament, as a parliamentary representative of the South, I am being robbed of the opportunity to seek to amend provisions in this bill that are not in the interest of my constituents. And that's where I think I depart. Because I believe that the authority of a parliamentary representative is so important, it has to be protected in the interest of the constituents that the individual represents. And my freedom to respond, my freedom to comment is being amputated because of the approach that is recommended. I take deep offense to that. Very deep offense to that. Because I believe that as a member of this Parliament, that I have the right and freedom to speak freely about legislation which I think will affect my constituents. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that I disagree with all the clauses in this bill. I think this bill has some good intentions. I mean, the question is, who will this bill benefit? And the answer is, it is the banks that are going to benefit principally from these banks by this bill, because of the setting up of these credit bureaus. But there are serious issues. Very, very, very serious issues. And so, Mr. Speaker, having said all of that and said that the central bank needs to rethink its approach to how it is going to reach out to stakeholders when it is proposing regional legislation affecting other people, I then turn to the issues. Now, Mr. Speaker, I hope that the time will come when I will have a more pleasant task, which is to complement the central bank if it can introduce legislation to protect the consumers who utilize the services of banks. And my problem is that the central bank is ignoring consumers, not paying attention to them, no matter what the pleas are. It is time that we have a Bill of Rights that protects consumers across the region. And I've been pleading for this for years. Not anything that is new. I have said so before, and there are others who know me full well from the days that I attended meetings at the central bank, and I kept on harping on this issue of creating a Bill of Rights for consumers, but basic things that consumers could look forward to. Mr. Speaker, that is a far more pleasant task. And I do hope that this message is carried forth in a manner that it makes eminence with clarity to those who are involved in the decision making. That we have arrived at that point when that is necessary, because we cannot rely on the banks to protect the interests, totally rely on the banks to protect the interests of consumers. It is vital that in this new environment we are in, that consumers are properly protected. Of course, I will be told that what you're talking about, that this bill does help consumers, that they're going to get a credit rating, but at what cost that's going to happen? And this is where, Mr. Speaker, I want to address some of the preliminary issues. The first thing I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I don't know why anybody would want to be a Minister of Finance these days with the kind of powers that the central bank wants. And you know, Ministers of Finance are quickly becoming an endangered species in the region, as if the problems of the region have been caused by Ministers of Finance. They're an endangered species. We come to this house time and time again, enacting legislation, assaulting the rights of politicians, discriminating against politicians. We accept it, only to be told that we have no choice because the Americans and the Europeans demand that we do it. And I forgot today to bring you a judgment coming out of the European Court of Justice, which recently indicated that some of the very same things that they are causing us to enact in our country is a breach of confidentiality and privacy in Europe. But we are busy enacting those things, Mr. Speaker. Busy. Now, Mr. Speaker, why are Ministers of Finance endangered? Why are you bothered to be why do you bother, Mr. Speaker, to be a Minister of Finance in a context of the same? Why do you look at some of these powers here, Mr. Speaker? If you think I am exaggerating, if you believe I am exaggerating why I think Ministers of Finance are endangered species, why they're being emasculated, consider the following sections. Look at section 25. And people find I shouldn't be talking about these things and get vexed when I do. I don't care, Mr. Speaker. It says 25:1. On the recommendation of the central bank, the minister may, by regulations. Then go to section 30 again, Mr. Speaker. Why you have a Minister of Finance? Just give the central bank, let them manage the ministry. Look at section 30, Mr. Speaker. On the recommendation of the central bank, the minister may, by regulations. Then look at section 56.1 and 56.2, Mr. Speaker. Just look at it. Just look at it, Mr. Speaker. If we go to 56.1 and 56.2. Look at it, Mr. Speaker. If you disbelieve me, look at it. 56.1, 56.2. In 56.1, the minister may, this time, the minister, on the recommendation of the central bank, may make regulations. It goes to 2. Without limiting the generality of subsection 1, the minister, on the recommendation of the central bank, may make regulations. Everything there, it is for the central bank to recommend to the minister. These ministers of finance must be a reckless bunch of people. People engaged in negligence. They don't know how to run ministries of finance and economics now. It's the central bank who has all the answers. How you can justify emasculating the powers of a minister of finance like this? And you know what is worse? The same ministers of finance sit around the table and allow this to happen and agree. That's the kind of problems that you have. It doesn't even involve cabinet, you know. It doesn't even say that the central bank may propose to the Minister of Finance, which is different. It says on the recommendation of the central bank. So what you see happening, Mr. Speaker, is this. And this is not a philosophical issue. On the one hand, the powers of the ministers of finance to manage the financial system is being diminished. And on the other hand, the central bank is arrogating more powers to itself at the other extreme. That is the situation. One of the few concessions that this decision-making arrangements in this legislation allows may be seen in section 41, and I really laughed at it, to be honest with you, is the provision dealing with setting up a review commission to hear complaints by users, data users and others who have problems with credit reporting. It says, this one, the minister may appoint a review commission for the purposes of hearing and determining applications for review. That's the only one. It doesn't say the minister may appoint on the recommendation of the central bank. So it's the minister now who must take the music, take the blows. Not the central bank hiding now. I mean, you know, they'll tell you I'm extreme and they don't understand how, as a found, I'm irresponsible. That's what they have saying in the region. I'm irresponsible. And you mean to tell me that you can't see the distribution of powers in this and understand the gravity of this? But you know, Mr. Speaker, there's something else apart from this excessive centralization of power and authority in the central bank. It's becoming a government unto itself. In the name of regional harmony and integration, how ministers of finance can allow these things to happen, I don't know. But whether we like it or not, as useful, Mr. Speaker, as this legislation may be, don't get me wrong, as I've said, we do need a credit bureau. It has uses. I mean, the banks love it. The banks love this credit bureau business. You know why? You know why? Because with this credit bureau business, it is not them to do the work, but they'll have one central authority where they can get information on the status of every person who has a... Don't look at me! Member for Castries, for Beaufort North. It's true. Your credit status will be reported to this bureau. How you... The member is laughing, Mr. Speaker. The member is laughing, Mr. Speaker. He does not know how he pays his electricity bills will be reported to the credit bureau. Yes. That's the reality. Whether you paid your bills or not, and every conceivable loan he has will be reported to the credit bureau. That's the reality. And if your clerk is looking at me, Mr. Speaker, saying, but where you get that from? The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation does involve a serious invasion of privacy of consumers and users of it. And it's too late, we can't decide it. That's a tragedy, member for Beaufort North. We have to decide whether the balance is right, whether we should concede this invasion into our privacy in the interest of improving the quality of banking services in the region. Now, these are the things that a credit provider, somebody who of course is using banking services and so on, who under this legislation is what you call a data subject, because for whom information has to be given. Look at this. In the case of the personal information of the individual, there must be a record of the type of loans the person has. It says the type, nature, and amount of the loan or the facility granted to the data subject from the credit provider. The data must include all outstanding loans, including contingent liabilities extended to the data subject by the credit provider. In other words, if you are dealing with the Bank of St. Lucia, then all your outstanding loans, whatever, if you are a guarantor, all of that must be included. The date on which the loan account was opened and the dates for payment of the principal, when you started the loan, how are you going to pay it? And of course, obviously, you know too, if you're not paying your loan and so on, then smoke your pipe, because it has to go in there. The loan balance and the maximum balance on the loan, the amount, the account status and liability of the data subject on the account, including the date of the last activity respecting the loan obligations. So if you see you have a loan there, Mr. Speaker, and the last time you pay on the loan was March 31st, 2001, that is recorded there, and that has to be part of the personal information that you supply. And then it goes on to say, any guarantee. And then this applies, and in the case of an entity that sells goods or offers services on a credit basis or with delayed payment terms, the amount of the goods and services provided on a credit basis together with contingent and possible, the dates on which the goods or services were provided, the agreed schedule of payment for the goods and so on and so on. What really this is that all your private information then becomes available. And the information is extensive. The minimum payment due, the amount of the last payment, etc., etc., etc. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is not just that kind of information that this requires, Mr. Speaker. It's not that kind of information. There is this section which also deals with your credit position regarding public utilities. And I want to touch on that very quickly so you could understand the breadth and depth of these requirements. And they will tell you I'm mischievous, I'm full of mischief, and I'm causing mischief. That's not the issue. The issue is the full extent of the invasion of privacy of individuals. Now look at section 27, subsection 3. To understand what I'm trying to say, Mr. Speaker. Subsection 27 says, first, look at 27.1 and who could be a credit provider. A credit provider means a bank or financial institution licensed under the Banking Act, so that is clear. A money services business, so if you're involved in money services, and we have some here, They are a credit provider. They have to provide information. A credit union or similar cooperative institution. So they too embrace for years. The central bank has been trying to manage credit unions, and it's succeeding gradually and slowly. So you're not safe. And believe it or not, an insurance company licensed under the Insurance Act, they are a credit provider because sometimes they lend you money on your policies, etc. A microfinance institution licensed under. So if you go into what do you call it? What do you call it? One Excel? Accel. And there are others.
That's a shock.
Well, they are sharks. They're loan sharks, you see. I'm not going to endorse what you said, but I hear you. So information from them as well has to go to this credit bureau. Now, listen to this. The central bank may by written notice published in the Gazette designate any of the following entities as a credit information provider for the purposes of this act if the central bank considers that it is in the public interest for the entities to be so designated. And they list here in solution. So the central bank can say that any of these can provide information about your utility bills and how you pay your utility. Which one of you want your life to be regulated to that extent? Why is my freedom being interfered with to that extent? Where's my privacy gone? It don't matter? Why should they know whether I'm paying Wasco or not? And listen to what it says. And you haven't heard this. A telecommunications provider license under the Telecommunications Act, Cap 811, or any enactment replacing. In other words, you see flow you have all of us have problems with? You know the problem that we have with flow, Mr. Speaker? They could get information from flow. And you know flow is notorious. They're notorious. You pay a bill, they still send you a bill to say you don't pay a bill. Every day people go on a flow quarreling. I never see a telecommunications operator that is causing such a mayhem in this country. And the more I ask for an ombudsman to investigate these people, how they're treating consumers, nobody takes me on. You see how I tell you all that? It's more punishment for me. It's more punishment from you. Let me share something with you about flow. You know, flow is famous for notifying you on your phone. On your phone about what the new bills come out. But they also notify you by email as well. Yeah. Now, like most solutions, I have two streams. I have a mobile phone. Yeah, and I also have flow at my house, not digital, flow at my house with television and so on. Mr. Speaker, it has been nearly a year I have been fighting with flow. They send me, Mr. Speaker, an email detailing what I owe at my house. But they refuse to send me an email detailing my bill about my mobile phone. I have called, emailed several persons at Flow, and still they will not send me the bill. So inevitably, I miss payments and they disconnect. They're happy to disconnect me. As soon as the time comes, disconnection. Flow not flowing. I don't have problems with that. It's not I can't pay the flow bill. That's not an issue. But I have been begging you to send me an email with that specific account each time. Each time. And up to this day, they can't send me. Now, you want to tell me that the central bank under this act will want to designate flow as an authority to provide information on how you're paying your bill? That's the reality. You might well be compromised simply because of the inefficiencies of the telecommunications provider. Why should the central bank have authority over this and not the Minister of Finance in his jurisdiction, who knows the habits of these agencies and these companies? Then it says, The St. Lucia Electricity Services Company Limited and any other persons licensed under the Electricity Supply Act or the National Utilities Regulatory Commission, so they too can send your bills, your LUSEC bills, whether you're paying your bills or not, or whether you owe any outstanding sums. And the favorite one, although I have a soft heart, because they're trying very hard, you sense it. The St. Lucia Water and Sewage Authority, if you don't pay your water bill, then that can end up on your credit report. And I know Vasco is really trying hard. They're really trying. They're really trying hard. Still a lot of improvement to go, but they're trying. Then the St. Lucia Development Bank. And crap or smoke your pipe if you have things from courts. If you see, Mr. Speaker, you are on hire purchase from courts, they can also report you to the Credit Bureau and so on. It says a person carried on the business of selling goods under hire purchase or credit sales under the Consumer Credit Act. So ordinary St. Lucians, crap or smoke your pipe if you're not paying your hire purchase. You understand, member of Beaufort North now, why I ask you to be on alert about this legislation? It is an invasion of privacy, a massive invasion of privacy. And frankly, I don't think the power that is under subsection 3 should be a power allowed to the central bank. That's a domestic matter. That's a matter that a minister of finance in his own country should be involved in. And Mr. Speaker, I have already spoken about the things that are to go under this in the credit report. Now, I don't know whether individuals have grasped how this works. What this is saying, and in very simple terms, so that they can understand the context in which I speak, Mr. Speaker. The Act allows for credit bureaus to be established in each of these countries. Okay? The business of the credit bureaus is to obtain information to get a credit profile of every individual. When you see you apply for a loan at the bank, the credit bureau can then inform you that the particular bank has asked for a credit profile. That bank will never give you a loan until they get a credit profile. So when you go to the bank says, I need your credit profile. Can you give authority to get permission to get the credit profile? You then have to inform the credit bureau that your credit profile may be submitted to the bank so that they can process your loan, because the bank wants to know your history. The bank wants to know if you are paying your debts. The bank wants to know if you are paying your Lusulec bill. The bank wants to know if you are paying your Wasco bill. The bank wants to know if you are paying your flow bill. The bank wants to know what other loans you have in other banks and whether you are paying those loans. The bank wants to know if you have any loans in a credit union that you're not telling them, or if you go to Accel Finance and borrow on the side a couple $1,000 and you're not telling them. All of that can affect your ability to pay. Now, these are the realities. But having said all of these things, there are some good things in the legislation, as I indicated at the beginning. For example, there's some protection of the consumer. All is not lost. All is not lost, Mr. Speaker. All is not lost. The draft legislation allows for the individual to receive a credit report every year, so that he or she can peruse the credit report and see what is written or what is there in the credit report, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to come back in a few minutes to that. So, that the legislation allows for the data subject, as I said, to receive a credit report once a year. The question that I want to ask is, why is it that it should be once a year and not every 6 months? Because a year in this business is a long time. And I think it is very important that a consumer or the data subject, that's the language they use, has an indication of what is happening with his credit reputation. Because things change very quickly. And I personally find a year, therefore, to be a little lengthy. Now, I see the Attorney General looking at me, and I suspect he's saying, but what section he's talking about? Look at, if you don't believe it, if you think I'm exaggerating, look at section 23. It says at section 23, 1AC, a data subject is entitled to receive from a credit bureau a copy of the credit report of the data subject held by that credit bureau without cost to the data subject once a year. That's what it says. And I don't understand. Now, let me just say to St. Lucians that one good thing, and there are not many good things, but one good thing about this legislation, and I believe it's a good thing, that it allows the data subject, the individual, to contest and seek redress if that individual feels that there is something erroneous in that credit report. For example, if your individual credit report says that you are a chronic liability, you don't pay your bills to Flow, either because you vex or whatever the case is, how Flow treating you, if you say that and it is recorded there, you can contest it and say there's no basis. And this is just speculating. I'm not saying that is the case. I'm just giving you an example because of the notoriety of Flow. And then the individual can say, here are my bills that are paid Flow. Why is this against my name? Because you see, you're awarded points. You're awarded points. Because the credit report will say how good you are to get a loan, how eligible you are, or down below, why you're such a risk that you should not be given a loan. So these days, St. Lucians will have to be going around and discussing credit reports as a regular item of discussion in our bars and so on, because fellas are going to ask you, what is the status of your credit report? Well, I mean, when you go to the bar and tell the barman, give me some credit there, get the boys a drink on my name, the first thing the barman will tell you, what is the status of your credit report? That's a reality. But we have to face the realities of this world, I guess. Because I'm betting you they're going to come and tell you now. Don't mind Kenny Anthony, If you see we don't pass that legislation for the credit report, the U.S. is going to come down hard on us. Because one of the concerns I have is how much of this information is made available to outsiders, because a lot of these credit bureaus, they will be reporting to a body outside of the region. It's very possible if the central bank allows that to happen. But I want to go back to the issue of redress, Mr. Speaker, because I think it is important. The legislation does say that if an individual disagrees with an entry, that individual can contest it. I say that is good, but I say you should get your information every 6 months and not once a year. And the legislation does provide some protection to the consumer to contest whatever is included in the credit report. Then also too, while it is the case that a report is made available once a year, the data subject or the individual can in fact ask for a credit report. This is very good and this is very helpful. But if you look at section 22, it says, without limiting the generality of subsection 1, a credit bureau shall, in respect of the data subject information processed by it, D, make available upon request to the data subject the name of every subscriber who obtains access to the data subject information and the date of access. So you can ask for it, but equally, if a bank go and ask for your credit report, if you want to find out why Republic Bank reject your loan, you can in fact go and ask who asked for the credit report, and they are under duty to make it available to you. So that is good. And then of course you can ask for the credit report to be made available, as I said earlier, to a bank or whatever institution that has requested such a credit report. The second thing is this. Is the appointment of a review commission for the purposes of hearing and determining applications for review under this part. In other words, if you are distressed or you disagree, then you could ask this review commission to hear your complaint, to determine your complaint. And that power is with the minister to appoint for the review commission for the purposes of hearing and determining applications for review under this part. You know, frankly, if I were a minister of finance, I would never agree to that. I tell the central bank, you want all the powers to make regulations, and you appoint your review commission. And stay away from that. Just let them take whatever responsibility. But they want a minister to do that, right? So when you see the person vexed because they don't get a loan, so they can come and knock on the Prime Minister's door. I say, I want to see you because I understand this thing is going up for review. I want to discuss it with you. Don't accept it. Let the central bank appoint their own review commission. You see, I'll tell you. When you see after this presentation, they'll say all kinds of things about me. How I mislead the House. How I mislead the people of St. Lucia. I'm not behaving like a former Prime Minister. I'm not behaving like a former respondent. That's all they do. What they have in the corridors, in the region about me. As if for some reason I should, But they will never tell you the good things, would they? They will never tell you the good things. I watch the central bank as it issues press releases every time it has a monetary council meeting. They would never tell you it is the Minister of Finance in Lucia who insisted that they do that. When he became Minister of Finance, the central bank never even to tell people what was happening with bank reserves or whatever. I had to insist that they now issue press releases. When you see we are going through our financial and economic difficulties, I'm the one who insisted that they engage the public. And since, of course, I have left the corridors of the central bank, they no longer engage unions and public service unions and tell them about the economy. They feel they don't have to do those things anymore. But this was the golden years. The years when accountability was understood, democracy was understood. These were the years when it was understood that you had to reach out to civil society. Now, I wanted to ask me about legacy and the rest of it, but if you check, all those institutions who did those things, who reached out to leaders of the opposition in the region, that was done in the era that I served as Prime Minister. I'm not saying I'm solely responsible, but I'm also saying that I was largely responsible. I insisted that we engage in these matters to inform the people of the region. And you want to come and tell me about democratic credentials and the rest of it? Why? Because I knew we had to change our systems of governance, not engage in our diminution of powers of ministers of finance, as has happened in this case, Mr. Speaker. And this is my contention. This is excessive centralization of authority in the central bank. It's not needed for something like credit bureaus. Yes, it needs to be regulated regionally. Yes, it is a good thing to have for the region to have a harmonious, but it does not mean that there be this massive centralization of power to the central bank. The Minister of Finance will soon no longer control much of fiscal policy. They have stripped them all of control over monetary matters, maybe justifiably. But going to this extent now? No. I think these things really have to be very carefully, very, very carefully thought about. But I just want to say to my colleagues, this emasculation of politicians and representatives of the people is really a very serious matter, you know. Nearly every couple of weeks or months we come to this parliament and we pass legislation. I don't know why we like to commit suicide so. And part of the reason we like to commit suicide is this foolish partisan warfare that takes place, you know. We come to this house, we willingly, like turkeys, whose necks will be snapped for Christmas and be served on Christmas tables. We allow our necks to be snapped by this assault because there is a calculated effort to strip political representatives of power and responsibility. And you see it in all this money laundering legislation that comes to the House. Make sure they take power away from politicians and relocate it in bodies and statutory bodies and authorities. And the politicians are allowing it because they feel that they don't want to be responsible to make hard decisions. And Mr. Speaker, truth be told, yes, I allowed some of that to happen. But equally, if this House is faithful and honest, and I know they are, I know this House is faithful, they will tell you that even when I served on opposition benches under the former government, I used to raise and say these issues. Now we need to be very careful about this emasculation. And you know what? I watch and listen when we go through our debates and discussing what has happened in the case of St. Lucia in the last 5 years, the excesses. Mr. Speaker, do you know that a lot of the excesses that we have been complaining about were committed by politicians, by ministers with the complicity of civil servants? And you're telling me that you should relocate all these powers to civil servants, let them make those decisions? And some of them, they're complicit in some of the things that occurred. Not standing up for the people of St. Lucia, not standing up for the constitution of this country. And you know, that's why I say that we are at moral crossroads. You decide what is right and what is wrong. So, Mr. Speaker, this is really my issue, and let me restate my position. And end on a note I said out. I understand the dilemma of the Minister of Finance and the member for Castries. I understand that what he's saying is that all other countries have enacted this legislation, save St. Lucia. I understand that. I understand that he's saying that the argument of the central bank is that this is causing embarrassment because they cannot activate the credit bureau because other countries will need the establishment of the credit bureau for the system to properly, in St. Lucia, for the system to properly. I understand that. I understand that the former government did have some issues and problems with this credit bureau issue. They had a subcommittee on it, they reflected on it, they too picked up there were issues. I don't know whether they will have picked up the issues that I have picked up. I don't know. But if that is the case, all well and good. I'm concerned about the legislation because what it is doing is to, emasculate the powers of a Minister of Finance unnecessarily so. And I believe that the time has come for us to seriously stand up to this onslaught against the representatives, elected representatives of the people of the country. I believe that this represents a massive invasion of the privacy of individuals, but I accept that one has to decide what should be conceded against what should be accepted. I recognize, Mr. Speaker, that there are some protective provisions of consumers in the legislation. I applaud these protective provisions. All well and good, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that certainly if the opportunity did arise before, I would have been even more forceful in insisting that this legislation be rethought. And this legislation is not legislation prescribed by the Attorney General's office in St. Lucia. They're just being obedient to the requirements of the central bank. They draft this legislation and pass it on to the AG and tell the AG, enact and go ahead. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Speaker. But you know, I end on a note that I said I would have, and that is, Mr. Speaker, that it is vitally necessary that the governments insist that another and different approach be used in enacting regional legislation like this. Stakeholders, the central bank should, if it wants regional legislation, should go out, talk to the stakeholders, discuss the legislation with them. For example, you strip the Minister of Finance of authority in your banking system, but you want the Minister of Finance to go and talk to the bankers. That makes sense? You strip him. And these days, the central bank is an onslaught against directors. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I just want to open the can of worms again. When I speak about the arrogation of powers, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give you another example. I mean, of this. Listen to this. The central bank gives itself the power to approve licenses and to refuse licenses. Look at section 8D1. In 8D1 it says that the central bank may refuse to grant a license to an applicant if the central bank, listen to this, Mr. Speaker, if the central bank has reasonable grounds to believe that, one, based on the past conduct of the applicant or any director, officer, or representative of the applicant is not likely to operate or carry on the business of a credit bureau with honesty and integrity and in accordance with this act, the regulations, or any term or condition of the license. They are arrogating on themselves to cast a moral judgment on who is fit and who is not fit. I mean, listen to the language. Is not likely to operate or carry on with honesty and integrity and in accordance with this act. How do you determine those things in the absence of any criminal culpability or breach of duty or breach of faith or anything like that? How you arrive at that? How you arrive at that to make that kind of judgment about people and individuals? These are the kind of issues. And listen to this one.
Member of Vivo South, you have 5 minutes left.
That's okay, Mr. Speaker. I'll finish in 5 minutes. The central bank may suspend or revoke a license granted to a credit bureau if the credit bureau demonstrates incompetence or untrustworthiness in the operation of its business. I mean, that's the range and plenitude of powers and authority that it has. Now, mind you, there are provisions, Mr. Speaker, that allows for an appeal in these matters. Whether the provisions that allow for an appeal are the best that the central bank can come up with, I don't know. But I know what they'll tell me, that other countries have this. We do be making noise. But, we are entitled to make noise, Mr. Speaker. Because this should never be a parliament that they feel they can take for granted. And that's the crux of my point. Parliaments have to be respected. Go and do your engagement with stakeholders before coming to Parliament, and don't put parliamentarians under this kind of pressure. That's my point, Mr. Speaker. let me just finally say, if members on the government side feel awkward when you see they start attacking Kenny Anthony, there are things you can say too, you know. You can say too. You can easily tell them, oh, you know, sometimes Dr. Anthony has his good days and his bad days. His bad days. What I will tell you though, I've never had a bad day where the central bank is concerned with the things we do. I still maintain that it is time that they pass legislation to protect the consumers and stop passing legislation or urging the enactment of legislation that only seeks to give them more power and authority in our region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see no more.
Member for Soufrière from Sejak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I had a lot to say, and I listened attentively to the member for Beaufort South, and I must say he has covered quite a bit of some of the issues that I would like to discuss. I first want to say that I rise in support of this piece of legislation before us, Mr. Speaker, and the main reason, as articulated, is because of the issue of our role, St. Lucia's role in the ECCU. But I support and I understand quite a few of the issues that was raised by the member for Beaufort South, Mr. Speaker. And he's correct that one of the institutions that will benefit more from this piece of legislation are our banks, especially our banks. Because I remember being a banker both in NCB, at NCB and Bank of St. Lucia, where we clamored for the establishment of a credit bureau. And that's a long time ago, Mr. Speaker, over 2 decades. And the main reason is because it will really simplify the work of the financial institutions in terms of assessing the risk profile of institutions and individuals. And the member for Beaufort South is correct. In order for the agency to gather that information, quite a bit of private information on individuals and institutions have to be collated into one database or several databases. So, Mr. Speaker, there has never been doubt on the need for a credit bureau, and there has been no doubt on the benefits of a credit bureau. We've had several discussions over the years in terms of the structure of that credit bureau, in terms of whether we allow the private sector to do to organize them and operate them as happened in the US, or whether we should have some central regulation. And this is what we have before us now, a piece of legislation that was put together by the ECCB and the IFC. The reason why it has not been passed, I believe, is because of the significant implication of that piece of legislation on the lives of the citizenry, Mr. Speaker. But what I would like to focus on are some of the member for Beaufort South has articulated very eloquently some of the, what I would say, disadvantages, especially in terms of the method in which that piece of legislation was put together. What I would like to comment on is this piece of legislation has the potential to impact the cost of mortgages, individual mortgages. So with a very effective credit bureau, Mr. Speaker, the risk profile of each one is going to be assessed, and 4 persons might be working in the same institution with the same salary, and these 4 individuals would approach a financial institution for a mortgage or maybe the same amount, and based on the risk profile, they ought to have that mortgage costed differently. So some persons might have 1%, a percentage of a point more than others because of that risk profile. So that is one of the major benefits of having a credit bureau. The other benefit, Mr. Speaker, that I believe the citizens of St. Lucia must understand is that the report of a credit bureau or agency become relevant when one applies for a loan, when you request an increase, for example, on your credit card limits, or when you're applying for a credit card. And in the developed countries, depending on the job you apply for, they might be asking for a report from your credit bureau. But Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, the whole issue of the real estate industry, in some cases, they do ask for a credit report. So when I think of a credit reporting agency in the context of what is happening in our environment in St. Lucia, I believe the member for Swazelle raised a key issue, and that fundamental issue is the need for extensive public education, Mr. Speaker. Extensive public education, especially coming from a situation of 2 years of COVID. And as the member for Beaufort South mentioned, persons, especially persons have not paid their electricity bills, and we have a large arrears on electricity bills. So the introduction of a credit reporting agency now in our environment has significant implication on the cost of borrowing for the average St. Lucian. And I'm hoping that the 2 years of COVID, the international bodies themselves, even before ours, would factor in would provide in the equation the impact of COVID on persons. Because unless this is done, quite a few St. Lucians would have a very bad credit rating, Mr. Speaker. So, in supporting this bill, I want to call very clearly on significant public education, and I believe, Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries East, who's the Minister for Finance, in his interaction both with the central bank and with the banking community here, would want to put this as one of the major issues on the table. Mr. Speaker, the other issue to me that we need to pay attention to would be the number of credit bureaus. Now, because this is, especially now, all of this is automated, and with digitization, I believe that the numbers, when you look at what has happened in the US, all the community credit bureaus have sort of come together into just about 3 major credit bureaus. So I am believing that we might be very limited in the numbers that we have. And the other area of concern to me would be ensuring the whole issue of digital security and safety and protection of data, Mr. Speaker. And what information, and I cannot say how we protect it, because even in the developed countries, we have the hackers making a bit of mess with the whole issue of automation. So these are some of the areas of concern that I believe that I would want to put on the table. This draft legislation has had significant consultation. As we've heard, I'm hoping very clearly that the member for Castries East, in his deliberation with the ECCB, will impress upon the governor that the ECCB should really go through that process of sharing the comments that he has received from St. Lucia and ensuring that we get back sometime or another to this honorable house with some amendments after having comments from the other countries to make some amendments to this piece of legislation. So with these two words, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this legislation. We have to move with the times, but we also need to discuss some of the negatives and some of the positives. I support this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Minister for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thanks to members for the contribution, Mr. Speaker. As we said, the legislation is not perfect. There are some concerns, and these concerns have been ventilated to the central bank, and at some point we hope to be, as is most things, to be reviewing to see what comes out of it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the need for education is important because we live in a modern world, and if you look at the television and every day you talk about your credit score, so there are certain things we can't escape from, and that is one of the things we can't escape from, Mr. Speaker. So we'll have to understand these things, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the governor of the central bank, seen about consumer protection and consumer rights, is something that we've raised at that level, and I must say that the central bank has formed a unit to deal with consumer education, to deal with deposit insurance, etc., Mr. Speaker. So that is a work in progress, but I agree that the central bank must look into the protection of the consumer. It doesn't exist as such in its present mandate, but the central bank is making efforts to help to alleviate the problem of consumer ignorance as to what their role is, etc. But we are working on. In fact, there is a project with a designated officer to work on consumer education and consumer protection as far as the central bank and monetary policy is concerned. Mr. Speaker, concerning the power of the Minister of Finance, apart from the fact that the Minister of Finance has to always face the music, there are several situations that the Minister is under tremendous stress and tremendous pressure, particularly from organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, sometimes that's the reality of the situation, that's the world we live in. But I agree that sometimes the politician is treated in manners in a way that could be improved, but this is the reality. The question is, who has the money calls the tune, and the world organization, these IFCs, they are the ones, the international financial institutions, they are the ones who give the money, and sometimes they may cause you some pain, but for the greater good and the good of the people of the country, until you can find something else to do, you have to comply. But Mr. Speaker, having said all this, I think that there's a general consensus that the credit reporting bill is necessary, and I look forward to its implementation and the benefits that will accrue to consumers when that happens. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that the credit reporting bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguard for data protection for customers of credit providers, to provide for a single space in the regulation of credit reporting and for related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Part 2, Clause 3.
Administration.
Part 2, Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Part 3, Clauses 4 to 16.
Licensing of credit bureaus.
Part 3, Clauses 4 to 16 stand part of the bill. Part 4, Clauses 17 to 32.
Credit reporting.
Part 4, Clauses 17 to 32 stands part of the bill. Part 5, Clauses 33 to 39.
Supervision by the central bank.
Part 5, Clauses 33 to 39 stands part of the bill. Part 6, Clause 40.
Civil liability.
Part 6, Clause 40 stands part of the bill. Part 7, Clauses 41 to 44.
Credit Reporting Review Commission.
Part 7, Clauses 41 to 44 stands part of the bill. Part 8, Clauses 45 and 46.
Appeals.
Part 8, Clauses 45 and 46 stands part of the bill. Part 9, Clauses 47 to 57.
Miscellaneous provisions.
Part 9, 47 to 57 stands part of the bill. Schedule 1.
Public registries.
Schedule 1 stands part of the bill. Schedule 2.
Constitution, operations, and procedures of the Credit Reporting Review Commission.
Schedule 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title and commencement.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable members, I beg to report that the credit reporting bill went through committee stages without amendments. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honorable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the credit reporting bill be read a third time and passed. And now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Credit Reporting Act 2023.
Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading the bill shortly entitled Registration of Supervised Entities.
Registration of supervised entities.
Minister of Finance.
Speaker, I beg to move for suspension of standing order number 48-2 to allow the bill to pass, go through its remaining stages at this sitting.
Honorable members, the question is that standing order 48-2 be suspended in order to allow the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to proceed with the remaining stages of the bill at this sitting. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of our contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Please, leave is granted. Please proceed, Finance Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is another bill that has been imposed upon us by the international financial architecture. Mr. Speaker, it is called the Registration of Supervised Entities Bill, and it actually is an extension to the money laundering prevention, Mr. Speaker. And what it seeks to do is it seeks to increase the number of entities that have to be supervised, Mr. Speaker, and have to follow the dictates of the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the bill is the registration of supervised entities is to provide for the registration of specified persons engaged in certain classes of business activity which present a risk for money laundering and other criminal conduct. Mr. Speaker, in its 2021 mutual evaluation report, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force identified in their mind what were certain deficiencies with respect to the supervisory duties and capabilities of the Financial Intelligence Authority in relation to designated non-financial business and professions called DNFBPs. DNFBPs are those businesses and professions which though not financial institutions, have obligations in combating money laundering and other criminal conduct and are considered attractive channels of money laundering, terrorist financial, proliferation, financing, and financial crimes. These designated non-financial business and professions typically provide or trade in high-value assets. For example, car dealers, real estate agents, and jewelers. And Mr. Speaker, some of these business entities that have been added to the list of supervised entities are registered agents and trustees, registered under the Registered Agent and Trustee Licensing Act, motor dealers licenses under the Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, a gaming operator licensed under the Gaming Racing Betting Act while engaging in transaction equally or not exceeding $8,000, a person involved in transactions for a client concerning the buying and selling of real estate, a dealer in precious metals or stones when engaged in any transactions equal to or not exceeding $25,000, a person that engages in internet gaming and wagering services, attorneys at law when they carry out transactions for clients in relation to the following activities: buying and selling real estate, creating, operating or managing companies, managing bank savings or securities accounts, managing clients' money, securities or other assets, or raising contributions for the creation, operation or management of companies, accountants when they carry out transactions for a client in relation to the following activities: buying and selling real estate, creating, operating or managing companies, managing bank savings or securities accounts, managing clients' money, securities or other assets, or raising contributions for the creation, operation of management companies. Mr. Speaker, again, that is more control and more regulation, Mr. Speaker, that has been imposed upon us by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, Mr. Speaker. And that came in relation to St. Lucia in its 2021 mutual evaluation report. They found that there is no mechanism for which the Financial Intelligence Authority can identify all entities operating in sectors such as real estate, car dealership, and jewelries to ensure that these sectors are supervised. So, Mr. Speaker, this, as I said, this bill is purely to follow the dictates of the FIA, Mr. Speaker. So what it says that these institutions, as I mentioned, have to be supervised, Mr. Speaker. They have to be supervised, and the registration of supervised entities bill, it says the purpose of the bill is to require a person who carries on a certain class of business activity to register. So the businesses that I call there now have to register with the FIA to provide for greater supervision monitoring of business activities that present a risk for money laundering and other criminal conduct. So these organizations must register, Mr. Speaker. Clause 1 of the bill provides for the short title of the bill, as I said. Clause 2 of the bill, interpretation, sets out the key definitions for words used throughout the bill, such as authority, beneficial owner, criminal conduct, other business activity, supervised entity, and ultimately own and control, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it defines these entities that I have called, Mr. Speaker. And the beneficial owner example has the main assigned under the section 2 of the money laundering Prevention Act, Mr. Speaker. So under section 2 of the Money Laundering Prevention Act, Mr. Speaker, a beneficial owner is identified, and that is, Mr. Speaker, a beneficial owner, Mr. Speaker, is a natural person who ultimately owns or controls a company or legal arrangement, who exercises ultimate effective control over a legal person or legal arrangement, such as senior manager or signatory, on whose behalf a transactional activity is being conducted, Mr. Speaker. These people are called, that is a beneficial owner, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it defines that these people have to be supervised, Mr. Speaker. And it also speaks on the section 4, Mr. Speaker, clause 4. It speaks of the requirement for registration, requires a person to engage in other business activity to be registered, and applies to a person engaged in other business activity before the commencement of the act, Mr. Speaker. Clause 5 of the bill, how your application for registration. Clause 6 of the bill, grant or refusal of application for registration, provides for the grant or refusal of an application for registration. Clause 7 of the bill, registration fee, provides for the registration of a person engaged in other business activities and for the issue of a certificate of registration. So after these entities that I mentioned have registered, they have to apply and they have to pay a fee, etc. And the clause 8, renewal of registration. Clause 9, suspension of registration. Clause 10, revocation of registration. Clause 11, deregistration and refusal to deregister. Clause 12, register of supervised entities. Clause 13, notice of change of director. Clause 14, notice of change of beneficial owner. Clause 15, notice of material change of information. And by virtue of clause 16 of the bill, false and misleading information, where a person gives false or misleading information to the authority, that person commits an offense and is liable to summary conviction of a fine not exceeding $25,000 or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year or both. Clause 17 of the bill, appeals shows that supervised of the bill appeals, allows the supervised entity to appeal a decision of the authority, to suspend the registration of the supervised entity to the High Court, and Clause 18 of the bill empowers the Attorney General to make consultation after consultation with the authority. Mr. Speaker, again, another set of legislation imposed upon us. As they say in Patois, nous c'est wa vet devant poule. These inspections are made, Mr. Speaker, and then a whole barrage of laws and regulations are imposed upon us, Mr. Speaker. And if you don't, you are blacklisted. And if you are blacklisted, you cannot operate in the international financial architecture, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this is significant because there is, among all these controls, is something called de-risking. And that is what we have to protect ourselves against. De-risking, Mr. Speaker. Because when that thing called de-risking, and again, this is the reason why we had to do what we did this morning for the reputation of the country, Mr. Speaker. When you are when de-risking happens, Mr. Speaker, you cannot transact any transaction in the international financial market. That means you can't use your credit card, you can't transfer money for SWIFT. This is such a serious thing, Mr. Speaker, de-risking, that you almost, and as the mayor for Castries South says, well, they've tried to take the power from the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance cannot sleep when he thinks of the risking, because if that ever takes place, the only person that will pay the penalty, the person that and the member social is laughing, Mr. Speaker. When that happens, the person who pays the penalty is the Minister of Finance and the government. That's the person who pays the price. So all the technocrats, they give the rules, they lay down the rules, they lay down what you must do, they tell you the laws you must pass, Mr. Speaker, and if you do not pass them, and you get the risk, they are protected, although they will suffer, but you are the ones, the Minister of Finance and the government and the politically exposed persons, Mr. Speaker, that we are the ones inside there. We are the ones again to suffer. Mr. Speaker, look at what a politically exposed person is. And in relation to St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, and these people fall under the Money Laundering and Prevention Act, Mr. Speaker. So they are supervised entities. A domestically politically exposed person, listen to it, in relation to St. Lucia means an individual who is entrusted with a prominent public function in St. Lucia, such as the head of state, the head of government, a senior politician, a senior government official, a judicial official, a military official, a senior executive of a state-owned corporation, an important political party official. So that means that means the chairman. What about that? Means the owner of the leader of the Green Party. Yeah, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is very serious, Mr. Speaker. These are political. And Mr. Speaker, the sad thing is that we, the politically exposed person, that's once you are in that position, you have no protection, Mr. Speaker. No protection for you. You can be maligned as if you almost have committed an offense when you get into politics. You can be maligned, you can be attacked, you can be crucified, all kinds of things can be said about yourself, your family, your children, and everybody else, but you have absolutely no recourse, Mr. Speaker. And that's the sad thing. So even there, you are considered a supervised entity, right? You are a supervised entity, Mr. Speaker. So sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it really is a situation where you wonder. But you have no privileges, only rights and duties, Mr. Speaker. But That's how it is. And when we choose, as I always say to my colleagues, nobody's sent to call you. So when you choose that, you must take it as it comes to the Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it is anticipated that this bill will bring St. Lucia one step further to being in full compliance with the international obligations and reduce the risk of our jurisdiction being blacklisted or placed on a blacklist. Mr. Speaker, I am sure next year by this time there will be another set of regulations that we have to impose that will cause us not to be blacklisted. The goalpost shifts all the time. So next year they'll come with another set of regulations, Mr. Speaker. Every time. And Mr. Speaker, I say that, and I think it's the right time to say it. Every time we in these small islands try to do something to give us some level of economic independence, some barriers are put in the way, Mr. Speaker. We were in bananas. They said that our quality was not good, so we have to deal on rules based, and there was free trade, so we could not do our bananas, Mr. Speaker. We went into the financial services, IBCs, trusts, all sorts of financial insurance companies, etc. They said that was a cause for money laundering, so they blacklisted us, and all these laws came in, Mr. Speaker. Now we are into the Citizens by Investment program, another set of rules and regulations and accusations of being areas of money laundering, etc. in our programs, Mr. Speaker. Anytime we try for some level of economic independence, there seems to be barriers in the way, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia will prevail in that we'll ensure that our good name is always protected. And I'm very happy to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that in all these situations, we always try to comply with the rules, even though we are sure that these rules are unfair and the goalpost is changing all the time and they are applied unequally, Mr. Speaker. The small islands seem to be the ones who have to carry the brunt of the punishment, Mr. Speaker. But that's how it is, Mr. Speaker, and we will try our best we are complying in the view of having our island not blacklisted and being able to operate in the international financial system. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is that the registration of supervised entities bill be read a second time. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that we have understood and I guess that all members agree with the bill, Mr. Speaker, and the limitations that is placed on us and what we have to do to remain in the financial architecture. And I move that, Mr. Speaker, that we continue the process, get the bill passed.
Honourable members, the question is that the registration of supervised entities bill be read a second time. And now put the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to provide for the registration of specified persons engaged in other business activity which pose a risk in relation to money laundering and other criminal conduct and for related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Administration of this act.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Requirement for registration.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Application for registration.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Clause 6.
Grant and refusal of application for registration.
Clause 6 stands part of the bill. Clause 7.
Registration fee and issue of certificate of registration.
Clause 7 stands part of the bill. Clause 8.
Renewal of registration.
Clause 8 stands part of the bill. Clause 9.
Suspension of registration.
Clause 9 stands part of the bill. Clause 10.
Revocation of registration.
Clause 10 stands part of the bill. Clause 11.
Deregistration and refusal to deregister.
Clause 11 stands part of the bill. Clause 12.
Register of supervised entities.
Clause 12 stands part of the bill. Clause 13.
Notice of change of a director or senior manager.
Clause 13 stands part of the bill. Clause 14.
Notice of change of a beneficial owner.
Clause 14 stands part of the bill. Clause 15.
Notice of a material change in information required for registration.
Clause 15 stands part of the bill. Clause 16.
False and misleading information.
Clause 16 stands part of the bill. Clause 17.
Appeals.
Clause 17 stands part of the bill. Clause 18.
Regulations.
Clause 18 stands part of the bill. Clause 1.
Short title.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Honourable members, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. And now put the question, as many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I beg to report that the registration of supervised entities bill went through committee without amendments. Finance Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and that the registration of supervised entities bill be read a third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's most excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This Act may be cited as the Registration of Supervised Entities Act 2023.
Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Anti-Terrorism Amendment.
Anti-Terrorism Amendment.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be presented for second reading at the next subsequent sitting of the House.
That's okay. Yeah, I know. Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to
It's on, it's on.
I beg to present for first reading a bill shortly entitled Companies Amendment.
Companies Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be presented for second reading at the next or subsequent sitting of this Honourable House.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stands adjourned until Thursday, March 16th at 1 p.m.
Honourable members, the question is that Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand adjourned until 1 p.m. on Thursday, the 16th of March, 2023. And now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
All right.
House sitting for today, Tuesday, the 14th of April, adjourning until 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 16th. We hope you'll join us then. Michael?
Merci un peu Winston. Nous venons au bout de session qui est constituée. Content nous avons l'autre session. Ça c'est pour jeudi à Yon et après-midi. Mais ça qui dit passé en cas qui était pour un plus discussion, c'était le Premier ministre qui présentait des motions pour prêter l'argent. Yon pour corriger la situation Covid. Avec l'hôpital, avec pas presque l'hôpital, mais Health Center, comme ça, et encore il pour prêter l'argent pour payer pour l'hôpital OKIU. Ça c'est pour ça c'est ça que Cayman City. Ça c'est ces mouna qui était le gouvernement en temps passé était appointé pour occuper l'hôpital là en laissant là puisqu'il était resté en charge sans occupation avec c'est ça ce qui était pour en charge discussion était un ministre qui parlé en Europe Dr. Kenny Anthony premier ministre qui parlé passé il parlait aussi pas de gens qui parlait mais ça qui est intéressant aussi c'était même parlement pour Sud Vieux Mikou il partait présent pièce les dit en session mais l'autre même opposition on a Bradley Felix était présent et il participait à toute cette discussion qui passait. Et bien c'est comme ça nous avons fini ici aujourd'hui quand nous avons répété qui nous avons vu ici à jeudi à Yon. Ça c'est les merci à nous Winston Springer avec l'autre c'est même technicien qui a travaillé puis nous avons dit merci un peu et nous avons dit passer pour station et bien studio nous NTN.